Chapter 67. Of the 12 gentleness villages in the capital, the most beautiful was Hundred Flowers Tower. The Hundred Flowers Tower was located in the most prosperous Rui Alley on West Street. It was built magnificently. Each of the women in the Hundred Flowers Tower had their own specialties. The men in the capital were so enthralled that they forgot about home and home. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they made a fortune every day. The peony lady of the Hundred Flowers House was the golden signboard of the Hundred Flowers House. This woman was charming and flirtatious, and proud to the bone. Because she had a bit of Huji blood in her, her facial features were deep, making her even more beautiful. Not only that, he was bold and shrewd, but he was also a gifted scholar. All these contradictions added to her charm. How many people were willing to throw away large sums of money in order to win a beauty's affection? Unfortunately, Miss Peony only sold her skills and not her body. Tonight, however, was the first time in the 3 years since she had entered the Hundred Flowers Tower that she had sold her virginity. At this time, the Hundred Flowers Tower was already packed with people. The hall with the swaying beaded curtains was filled with young masters from noble families. Everyone wanted to be Miss Peony's guest. Sitting in the middle was a young master dressed in green. He was in his early 20s, and his appearance could be considered handsome. However, the dark circles under his eyes were nauseating. One look and one could tell that it was caused by excessive indulgence. He waved his folding fan with one hand and said rather flirtatiously, "Why hasn't Miss Peony come out yet? You've made everyone wait for quite a while." Beside him stood a young woman in the prime of her youth, dressed in a thin pink muslin skirt. Her jade-like arms picked up a small cup of wine on the table and gently fed it to the green-clothed gentleman's mouth. "Sister Peony is dressing up." Young Master Li's words make this servant sad. Could it be that I only recognized Sister Peony? This young man in green was the eldest son of Prime Minister Li Dong. Li Dong had 2 sons. His eldest son, Li Yang, was ignorant and incompetent. He spent his days in the brothels and loitering around the willows. He had learned 70% of Li Dong's lecherous nature. His son, Lian, was smart and talented. At such a young age, he had already achieved great things in his career. Tonight was Li Yang's first night at the Hundred Flowers Tower, wanting the peony. In a seat not far from Li Dong, there was another person with a dazed look in his eyes. His bright blue coat was stained with wine, and beside him was a burly manservant. On the other side, another beautiful lady was pouring wine for him. It was Jiang Chao, who came here after drinking. Jiang Chao's gaze was dark as he pulled the woman who was pouring wine into his arms and said, "I heard that the peony in your brothel loves scholars the most." Caught off guard, the woman was pulled into his arms. Just as she was about to put on a bashful expression, Jiang Chao suddenly asked her this question. The women of the brothel naturally knew how to read a person's words and body language. Although they didn't know how, judging from Jiang Chao's upper-class clothing, he should also be from a wealthy family. She didn't dare to slight him and softly said, "Not all of them. It's just that most of the people that Sister Peony has chosen are talented and learned." She laughed delicately. "Look at young master's appearance. You're a true scholar. You must be very talented and knowledgeable." It would have been better if she hadn't said it, but the moment she said it, Jiang Chao's expression changed. The image of Lu Min sitting leisurely on a tall horse appeared before his eyes. He immediately pushed the woman away and coldly drank a mouthful of wine. The woman didn't understand why Jiang Chao was angry. She cursed in her heart and left with a smile. Right at this moment, a clear and melodious voice rang out from upstairs. "Miss Peony has arrived." Immediately, the surroundings flared up. Li Yang, who was fanning himself, heard the noise and narrowed his eyes to look upstairs. He saw a woman with a veil covering her face appear upstairs. She wore a black and yellow hibiscus embroidered robe with a phoenix pattern, a patterned slanted skirt that dragged the ground, and a silk cloth with blue clouds embroidered on it. She had long black hair that was piled up into clouds and was coiled into an elegant and unique double immortal bun. A copper briao with twisted rose threads was inserted into her hair. Her creamy white hand wore an agate bracelet, and a long ribbon was tied around her waist. A fragrant pouch of folded flowers hung from it. She wore a pair of lotus flower embroidered shoes. Her entire person was as dazzling as a spring peach. Because she was wearing a veil, the crowd couldn't see her appearance clearly. However, seeing her graceful figure, they felt an unbearable itch in their hearts. They wanted nothing more than to rush forward and tear off that veil. The woman was rather magnanimous. She stood on a small platform on the second floor and leaned against the pavilion. Suddenly, she let out a light laugh. Her voice was like a silver bell, clear and melodious, yet also carrying a hint of wildness. She extended a pair of tender, jade-like hands, and gently took off her veil. Immediately, a face that could outshine the moon and put flowers to shame was revealed. To tell the truth, although Peony was born beautiful, she wasn't a national beauty that could cause the downfall of a city. For example, Jiang Su or Jiang Yuan of the Jiang family, she definitely couldn't compare. However, she won in that exotic style. Her complexion was slightly dark, but it didn't seem rustic. That pair of azure eyes were like sapphires. With just a glance, the hearts of more than half of the men present would be hooked away. Li Yang murmured, "This kind of natural beauty, if I could obtain it, I would definitely indulge in pleasure. Peony, I want you." Although Jiang Chao normally wasn't as lecherous as Li Yang, he was still a man in his bones. Moreover, he had drunk a little wine. Now that the smell of alcohol had risen, and Peony was a natural beauty, a ball of fire sprang up in his heart. Peony was also an expert. All the men in the capital wanted to play with her, but in the end, no one knew who was the one playing with who. She lightly tossed the veil downwards. Immediately, the men rushed forward like a swarm of bees to snatch it. In the end, the young man who managed to snatch it placed the veil under his nose and lightly sniffed it. His gaze revealed a trace of infatuation. Li Yang frowned, but Peony lightly laughed from upstairs. She said, "Gentlemen, Peony is here. Now, you can start bidding." Her posture and tone were bold, and her hot tears immediately caused the audience below the stage to go crazy. Li Yang's gaze was fixed on her. I wonder what kind of ecstasy it would feel like in bed with such a wonderful person. He waved his hand at the manservant beside him, and the manservant immediately joined the bidding team. Li Yang had a well-thought-out plan. In terms of wealth and honor in the capital, their Li family was absolutely second to none. His old man, Li Dong, had once done something like bidding for a brothel girl. To him, money was only a small matter, as long as he could bring home a beauty. Although there were many young masters below the stage, those who came to the brothel to bid were mostly ignorant and incompetent. Even if they had a bit of skill, they were all afraid of their family elders finding out. Using their own money, they were ultimately fearful. However, he didn't care about the inside or the outside. In any case, he wasn't afraid that his father would find out. Perhaps if his father found out about this, he'd have to come another day and have him taste that unparalleled beauty. Li Yang was inwardly pleased. The bidders were fierce at first, but they slowly calmed down later on. This was because the price was no longer something ordinary rich families could raise. Peony smiled brightly, watching the silver increase bit by bit. In the end, there were actually only two people bidding. One was the manservant beside Li Yang, and the other was a big and burly man. Li Yang beckoned for the manservant to return to his side. Seeing that the price had already reached 3,000 taels of gold, he lazily extended 4 fingers. 4,000 taels. The big and burly man retreated behind Jiang Chao and said in a low voice, "Young master, that fellow is clearly provoking us." Jiang Chao was depressed and indignant. Originally, he was determined to obtain Peony today. Although he was already drunk, he vaguely understood that 4,000 taels of gold was not a small sum. He simply didn't have that much silver. But hearing Daniel say that that person was provoking him, Lu Min's arrogant and disdainful gaze appeared in Jiang Chao's mind again. He clenched his teeth. 5,000 taels. As soon as these words came out, the surrounding people were shocked. In the whole world, there was no famous courtesan who could pay 5,000 taels of gold for a night. Li Dong snorted and looked Jiang Chao up and down seriously. Although Jiang Chao's clothes were not cheap, in the end, he still couldn't compare to himself. In his heart, Li Dong was certain that Jiang Chao was trying to look impressive at his own cost. Unconcerned, he waved his hand. 6,000 taels. 7,000 taels. Jiang Chao clenched his teeth. When he looked at Li Yang again, he only felt that the person on the seat had changed. It was the proud scholar who had ridden his horse through the streets today. In his heart, there was only one thought: compete, he must compete with him. 8,000 taels. Li Yang said angrily. 9,000 taels. Jiang Chao smashed a teacup. Li Yang was extremely angry. He could also see that this person was deliberately opposing him. He said, "Add a bushel of pearls." Jiang Chao saw that he was no longer just calling for gold. Looking at the wine cup in front of him, he suddenly became more clear-headed. No matter what, he could not take out 9,000 taels of gold. Not only that, if Jiang Quan found out about this, he would definitely beat him until he couldn't get out of bed. But now, under the watchful eyes of so many people, could it be that he had to just give up with his tail between his legs? At this moment, his competitive spirit had already been aroused by Li Yang. His actions were always faster than his reason. He raised his head, just in time to see Peony's gaze on him from the second floor. That gaze was full of smiles, as if it was a gentle encouragement, but also a silent mockery. His heart swayed, and heroically said, 10,000 taels. There was no more sound. Everyone looked at him as if they were looking at an idiot, but Jiang Chao only stared at Li Yang. In his eyes, at this moment, Li Yang was the flustered and exasperated Lu Min, who could not do anything to him. Although Li Yang was a hedonistic son of rich parents, he was well aware of the rules of the brothel. Although a beauty was good, 10,000 taels was too expensive. 10,000 taels was already enough to buy quite a few clean young beauties. Thinking it over, it really wasn't worth it. Although he was furious in his heart, he still smiled and said, "Since that's the case, then this young master won't snatch what others like. Miss Peony, it's a pity." Finished speaking, he cupped his hands, turned around, and left. However, when he reached the door, he still couldn't calm down. With a pair of sinister eyes, he ordered the manservant beside him, "Investigate that person for this young master. Snatching my woman, I'll make him regret it for the rest of his life." After Li Yang left, Peony chuckled softly. Peony's heart is truly moved that Sir is willing to throw away 1,000 gold for Peony. I'll have to trouble Gongzi to deliver the money to Mama downstairs, and then come to Peony's boudoir for a small gathering. Silver notes? Jiang Chao abruptly reacted and looked at Peony's gentle blue eyes again. He didn't know why, but he actually broke out in a cold sweat. Of course, he knew that he didn't have any extra money to pay Peony, but 100 Flowers Tower wasn't completely defenseless in the capital. What could he do if they made a scene? At this moment, the burly manservant beside him, Dainu, said, "My young master left in a hurry today, so he didn't bring any silver." As soon as he said that, everyone roared with laughter. He'd specifically come to buy Peony's first night, but he didn't bring any silver. Wouldn't it be a joke if it was said that? Peony looked at him with great interest. But 100 Flowers Tower doesn't have the rule of credit. How about Gongzi first bring the silver, and then we can have a good talk? These words were ridiculing, and Jiang Chao was enraged in his heart. He'd already drunk wine, and he didn't have any taboos in his actions. Looking at Peony's face brimming with mockery, he immediately jumped up and cursed, "Nothing more than a whore in the flesh business. Eyes open at the sight of money, and you still say you love some gifted scholar. What a hypocrite. Slut. Peony's complexion changed, and a group of guards carrying sabers and staffs suddenly surged in the surroundings. Peony normally socialized widely, and high officials and nobles were also willing to give her face. Some of these guards were sent by nobles, and they were responsible for protecting Peony. At this moment, they tightly surrounded Jiang Chao, and Peony said indifferently, "It seems that Gongzi has come to make trouble, or perhaps you want to take advantage of the disturbance to renege on your debt? 100 Flowers Tower treats customers who renege on their debts with old rules." She nodded her chin, indicating for someone to come over. "Does Gongzi want to keep his left hand or his right hand?" Jiang Chao was startled, and immediately wanted to rush forward, cursing and swearing, "I'll kill you, slut." How could the guards be willing to tolerate him? In a few moments, they subdued him to the ground. Seeing this, Daniel panicked and said, "Miss, please be magnanimous. My family's young master doesn't want to renege on his debt. Would Miss please bring some people to the Jiangfu in the capital city? My family's young master is the second son of Minister Zhang's Fu. Miss can bring young master's keepsake to get the money." The surrounding people began to discuss again. Minister Zhang's family was upright, and they hadn't expected that his son would have such a scoundrel's face. Everyone couldn't help but recall the rumors about Jiang Su a few days ago during the Lantern Festival. Indeed, one could know a person's face but not their heart. It seemed that this Jiang family wasn't as upright as they appeared on the surface. Peony's eyes turned. "Since that's the case, Mama, please bring some people to the Jiangfu. Everyone present, please be my witness. This young Master Jiang spent 10,000 taels here to buy peonies tonight. When young Master Jiang delivers the money, Peony will naturally have a long talk with young Master Jiang through the night." After saying this, she couldn't bear to look at Jiang Chao any longer, so she flicked her sleeves and left. Although Peony was a prostitute in the capital city, she had many connections and knew many high officials and nobles. Many people still had to give her face. Thus, she really didn't put Jiang Chao's status in her eyes. That night, Jiang Wan closed her book and prepared to rest. She faintly heard the sound of crying coming from outside. She rubbed her temples. "What's going on?" Baiji got up and brought her some hot water. "I don't know. It was like this just now. Lu Zhu has already gone out to inquire." As she spoke, Lu Zhu had already flashed into the room. Seeing Jiang Wan and Baiji looking at her, she said, "It seems to be someone from Baihua Lu. They said that second young master owes them money. To ask for money, they actually came to the Fu." Baiji couldn't hide the disdain in her words. She had always felt some conflict towards a place like Baihua Lu. Furen and Master quarreled fiercely. Lu Zhu smiled craftily. Furen wanted to use money to redeem second young master, but Master said that he didn't have that much money. Furen then cried and quarreled with Master. Jiang Wan smiled. Furen has really misunderstood him. Indeed, the Jiang Fu did not have 10,000 taels of gold. This Fu looked magnificent and majestic, but in the end, it was just an empty shell. Moreover, a few days ago, in order to bribe official Zhao for Jiang Chao's imperial examination, the Jiang Fu had spent a large sum of money. Although it was ultimately wasted, the money had actually been spent. Such a big thing has happened in the Fu. As a daughter, how can I not go and take a look? Jiang Wan stood up. "Let's also go and take a look." Lu Zhu and Zhou Momo slept in the room next door. Jiang Wan did not wake her up. Lian Xiao and Baiji helped her put on a coat and a cloak. Just as they walked to the entrance of the courtyard, they saw Fu Rong supporting Jiang Dan. When Jiang Dan saw her, she jumped in fright. She hurriedly bowed to her and asked cautiously, "De Jiejie, have you also heard about second brother's matter?" Jiang Wan nodded. "Although I don't know what exactly happened, I still have to go and take a look." "I also think so." Jiang Dan shyly lowered her head. "After all, we are sisters." Jiang Yuan glanced at her with a smile and said no more. The two of them then got up and walked towards the main hall. As soon as they entered the main hall, the first thing they heard was Xia Yan's crying. Jiang Yuan raised her eyebrows. She saw that all the yin yang were present. Jiang Li had a gloating look on her face, while Jiang Su's face was snow white. If one looked closely, one could see the panic in her eyes. De Yin Yang was cautiously persuading Xia Yan. "Furen, don't cry. What if you hurt your body?" Xia Yan did not even look at her. She only tightly grabbed Jiang Quan's arm and cried, "Master, that is our flesh and blood. Do you really intend to ignore him?" Jiang Quan pursed his lips and lowered his head to look at Xia Yan. At this moment, Xia Yan's hair was slightly messy. Her face, which had always been filled with the aura of a scholar, was streaked with tears, making her appear even more elegant. After all, she was a woman whom he truly loved. Jiang Quan supported her with one hand and sighed. "It's not that I don't want to save him, but the Fu does not have that much money. We can go and borrow." Xia Yan was somewhat frantic. "Master, don't you know many bureaucrats? Just borrow some. It won't be long before I can go to my maternal family to borrow." "Master, Chao, cannot fall into their hands. What kind of place is 100 Flowers Tower, Master?" "Nonsense." Jiang Quan withdrew his hand. His gaze once again became cold and hard. "Borrowing money from colleagues? Do you think that my Jiang Fu's face can be trampled on so casually? Father, what's going on? What kind of place is 100 Flowers Tower?" Jiang Yuan opened her mouth to ask. Only then did everyone see that she and Jiang Dan had arrived. Jiang Quan frowned. "What are you doing here?" Bai Ji and Lian Xiao pursed their lips. The Fu Xinyang had come, but Jiang Yuan and Jiang Dan were not invited. Did they really think that they were transparent? Jiang Yuan said, "I heard the quarrel at night. I was concerned and came to take a look." "But what happened?" Her expression of concern did not seem to be fake. Jiang Quan stared at her with a complicated gaze. Under the light of the lantern, Jiang Ruan's features were picturesque. She wore a bright red rui satin cloak, which made her look even more exquisite like a jade carving. He had also heard about the incident at the Lantern Festival a few days ago and had suspected Jiang Yuan. The young girl in front of him was slender and elegant. Looking at her carefully, she also had some resemblance to Zhao Mei's original appearance. He was somewhat absent-minded. When Xia Yan saw Jiang Yuan, her eyes lit up. She rushed over and said, "Yuan, mother knows that you are the softest-hearted and a kind child. Now that something has happened to your second brother, can you first take out the dowry that older sister left for you to save your brother? After a few days, mother will return it to you." She looked at her expectantly. Jiang Yuan looked at her quietly. Was Xia Yan's brain damaged? She actually asked her for help. Unfortunately, she smiled slightly. "Mother, what are you saying? If I really had money, I would naturally take it out to save second brother. But mother also knows that when I went to the rural residence 5 years ago, the evil servants there bullied the master. The dowry that mother left for me had long been looted by those evil servants." She sighed. Yuan Yang really has the heart but is powerless. Xia Yan's hand loosened and she looked at her blankly. Jiang Ruan's gaze calmly met hers. She did not know whether Xia Yan was currently regretting her actions. After all, she was the one who had sent her to the rural residence. Now, she only had herself to blame. In order to marry Jiang Quan, Zhao Mei had severed all ties with the Zhao family. Thus, there was not much dowry left. But in the end, she was still from a family of generals. Over the years, together with the jewels and ornaments she had collected, there were at least 1,000 or 2,000. In order to maintain her virtuous appearance, Xia Yan had never had any ideas about this dowry. The things that had been stolen from the rural residents had long been returned when Imperial Censor Wang had sought redress for her grievances. However, at that time, Jiang Wan had asked Lian Qiao to change everything into banknotes so that one day, when Xia Yan asked about the dowry, she could confidently reject it. Xia Yan felt as if her entire body had been hollowed out. Her whole body went limp and she muttered, "My Chao, could it be that he has really reached the end of the road?" Seeing her in such a state, Jiang Su could not help but run to her side. Both mother and daughter burst into tears. Jiang Li frowned. Second brother is really too willful. The fool really does not have that much money, and he even angered father. Second Yin Yang covered Jiang Li's mouth, knowing that now was not the time to add fuel to the fire. Sure enough, Jiang Quan fiercely glared at Jiang Li. Seeing this, Hong Ying walked forward. "Furen, don't just think about crying now. Although the fu does not have 10,000 taels of gold, there should still be a few thousand taels. Why don't you go and get it first, then talk to the people from Baihua Lu and have them release the people first." Jiang Wan laughed in her heart and glanced at Hong Ying. Hong Ying herself had come from a brothel, so it was impossible that she did not know the rules of a brothel. The more popular a girl was, the higher her net worth. Not everyone could offend her. If one owed a large debt and was unable to pay it back, then one had to keep one's life. If one could not pay it all back, then there was absolutely no reason to put it on credit. If the people from the Jiang Fu went to talk to Bai Hua Lu tonight and were only willing to fork out a portion of the money, then it would be tantamount to admitting that the Jiang Fu could not afford the rest. Then, according to the rules, Jiang Chao would have to keep a portion of what he had on him. This fifth Yin Yang looked gentle and graceful, but in the end, she had come from the streets. Her methods were no less ruthless than Jiang Ruan's. Jiang Quan looked at Xia Yan and her daughter, who were crying themselves hoarse. His heart softened and he finally said, "Don't cry anymore. Housekeeper Zhang, go to the storehouse and get some money. Find a few people and make a trip to Baihua Lu." Xia Yan's crying stopped, and she temporarily breathed a sigh of relief. Jiang Quan then looked at Jiang Wan and the others. "There is no point in you staying here. Go back to the courtyard and don't come out and walk around." Jiang Dan hurriedly and timidly complied. Jiang Wan nodded and left the hall with Jiang Li. Jiang Li's courtyard was in a different direction from Jiang Ruan's. Before they left, Jiang Wan said to Jiang Dan, "I did not expect that second older brother would actually commit such a grave mistake. If Zuma were to find out, I wonder how angry she would be." Jiang Dan stared blankly. Jiang Li's footsteps paused, and she quickly left. Jiang Dan asked, "Does Dejijia mean that Zuma still does not know about this matter? Did you see any trace of Zuma tonight?" Jiang Wan said, "Since I did not see her, then naturally I do not know." She walked slowly with a smile on her face. Who knew if the old Jiang madam would wake up the next morning and find out that half of the Jiang Fu's life savings had been used to pay for Jiang Chao's wishful thinking. And Jiang Chao was destined not to return in one piece. That night, Jiang Wan slept very deeply. When she opened her eyes in the morning, the sunlight from outside was already shining into the room. Seeing that she was awake, Baiji smiled and said, "Miss slept very well last night, but you woke up late this morning. Mother has not ordered me to pay my respects, so there is no harm in being late." Jiang Wan smiled. Furen is not in the mood for Miss to pay her respects now, she is too busy. Lian Qiao brought over some hot water, and as she helped Jiang Wan wash her face, she said, "Mei Qing Yuan has been turned upside down." Jiang Wan took the handkerchief and asked, "How is it now?" Second young master's right pinky finger was chopped off. Lian Qiao said, when he came back, he was dripping with blood. It was so scary. After a pause, she continued, "Now, the news has spread outside that second young master went to Baihua Lu to throw away 1,000 taels of gold in one go, but in fact, his pockets were empty. Our Jiang Fu could not take out so much money at the moment, so we only gave 5,000 taels. The people of Baihua Lu spared second young master's life, and only chopped off his pinky finger. After Jiang Wan finished washing her face, she returned the handkerchief to Lian Qiao and asked, "What else?" "Miss is really amazing," Lian Qiao said. Old Furen somehow found out about this matter, and flew into a terrible rage. Furen and second miss are grounded. Now, the physician has just finished seeing second young master and wants to take old Furen's pulse. Third younger sister's actions are so fast. Jiang Wan smiled slightly. Has this matter spread throughout the capital? Of course. Lu Zhu came in from outside. When she heard Jiang Ruan's words, she casually added, "Now, everyone knows about the story of second young master throwing away 1,000 taels of gold for a beauty at Baihua Lu last night, and even had his finger chopped off. Everyone says that the Jiang Fu is actually very poor." As she said the last sentence, she looked at Jiang Ruan's expression with some embarrassment. However, she saw that Jiang Ruan did not take her words to heart in the slightest. Instead, she asked about another matter. "How is father now?" "Master is extremely angry. If second young master was not currently bedridden and unconscious, he would have rushed up to beat him up. It seems that he has encountered an extraordinary event." Jiang Wan lowered her head and took a sip of the tea that Baiji handed to her. The Jiang Fu's reputation, after Jiang Chao's ruckus last night, could be considered to have been completely destroyed. For a person like Jiang Quan, who valued his reputation, this was undoubtedly a huge blow. After this incident, the imperial censor's report would inevitably be against him. This would also be a hindrance to his official career. Of course, the most important thing was the conflict with the Li family in the capital. Since Jiang Chao had won the championship after throwing away 1,000 taels of gold last night, he was bound to offend Li Yang. Li Yang was a narrow-minded person. How could he leave the matter at that? Jiang Ruan looked out of the window. Jiang Chao had dominated the title of the Jiang Fu's Son for so many years that the world had almost forgotten that the Jiang family still had Jiang Xing. This debt, let her collect it on Jiang Xing's behalf. Jiang Chao, was this painful? From heaven to hell was only a step away, but this was just the beginning. In the study, Xia Yan looked at Jiang Quan in panic. "Master, you can't lock Chao up, why don't you let him go to the Imperial College?" Unfilial son. Jiang Quan was unable to restrain his anger. "Listen to what the outside world is saying about my Jiang Fu. Going to Baihua Lu to learn how to throw away 1,000 taels of gold, my Jiang Fu has raised him for so many years in vain. He failed in the imperial examinations and only knows how to drink all day. What a good son you have raised. I know that master is angry." Xia Yan knelt down, "but Chao is young and ignorant. Who hasn't made mistakes? Chao is also a son that I carried for 10 months. When Chao was young, people scolded him for being a bastard son. Master, have you forgotten? Everything Chao did was to bring glory to the Jiang family. His failure this time caused him to feel extremely uncomfortable in his heart, which is why he made such a big mistake. Now, hasn't he already received his punishment? Chao has already lost a finger. Please, master, take pity on him." Jiang Quan looked at Xia Yan kneeling on the floor and took a deep breath. This was the woman he loved, but he had made her bitterly wait for several years to become his wife. Jiang Chao had been born a bastard son, so no matter how much he compensated, it was of no use. Xia Yan continued, "Master, don't tell me you don't even want your only son anymore." Jiang Quan's heart thumped heavily. Jiang Xing's life and death had been unknown for 5 years, so he had the right to pretend that he did not have this son. Xia Yan was right, Jiang Chao was now his only son. He sat down in front of the desk and said in a dispirited tone, "I am doing this for Chao's own good. Last night's matter has caused him to form a grudge with the son of Prime Minister Li Fu. If he does not lie low, I am afraid that Li Yang will not let him off easily." Xia Yan stared blankly. "Prime Minister Li, who is Li Yang?" How could Chao form a grudge with them? Jiang Quan sighed and explained the ins and outs of the matter to Xia Yan. There was one more thing that he did not tell Xia Yan. Li Dong was a person by the 8th prince's side. Now that he wanted to curry favor with the 8th prince, he had provoked Li Dong for no reason. If Li Dong got in the way, in the future, the big tree that was the 8th prince would not be able to tolerate him. Moreover, Li Dong's influence in the imperial court was extensive, so no matter what he said, it was not a good thing. Hearing Jiang Quan's words, Xia Yan muttered to herself, "Master, are you saying this because you don't want to become enemies with the Li family?" Climbing up the Li family and the Jiang family is a good thing. Jiang Quan shook his head. I originally wanted to find an opportunity to build a connection, but now that Chao is like this, I have instead formed a grudge. Xia Yan was silent for a moment, a thought emerging in her mind. She said, "Master, do you know what is the most stable relationship?" Jiang Quan looked at her. Xia Yan said, "What if there is a marriage alliance with the Li family? Li's conduct is too flamboyant, and Dan is too young." Jiang Quan frowned. "Don't let your imagination run wild." Xia Yan shook her head. After all, Li and Dan are concubine daughters, and their statuses do not match, so they cannot be the official wife. Could it be that you are thinking of Su? Jiang Quan frowned. What kind of place is the Li family? Father-son marriages happen from time to time. Even if I want to curry favor with the Li family, I will not send Su into such a fiery pit. Master, what are you saying? Xia Yan walked a few steps towards Jiang Quan and nestled against him, her pair of jade hands gently massaging his shoulders. Su is also my flesh and blood, how could I think of her so? What I mean is Ruan She looked at Jiang Quan's stunned expression and continued, Ruan has a calm temperament. Although I am also worried, doesn't the Li family still have a younger son? That younger son is very intelligent, and if he takes a fancy to Ruan and their statuses are also suitable, wouldn't that mean we have a good relationship? In this way, we can make amends, and presumably that Li Dong will not make things difficult for us. Hearing this, Jiang Quan suddenly realized, I actually forgot about Lian. You are right, that Li An's future prospects are limitless. If Ruan marries him, the Jiang Fu will have a helping hand. However, he said with some hesitation, such a good marriage, you actually did not consider it for Su, Ruan's life is bitter, Xia Yan said gently, in any case, Su has me to worry about her, but Ruan is a child without a mother. Both are daughters of the Jiang Fu, could it be that I would deliberately harm her? Besides, I still want to keep Su by my side for a few more years. The marriage is not urgent, we can take our time to choose. Seeing the smile on Xia Yan's face, Jiang Quan's expression finally softened, and he embraced her in his arms. I know that you are a person who understands the big picture, and marrying you in this life is my good fortune. Don't worry, I will definitely find an excellent marriage for Su and in this life, I will not let her feel wronged. Xia Yan smiled and agreed. The two of them talked for a while before Jiang Quan said, since that's the case, I will first send an invitation to the Li family, and let them come to the Fu for a chat. Xia Yan smiled and said, then I will not disturb master, I will go see Chao. She closed the door, the smile on her face disappearing in an instant. She walked through the corridor and into the courtyard, where Cui Yu was taking care of Jiang Chao. Seeing her enter, she hurriedly got up and retreated to one side. Jiang Chao was lying motionless on the bed, and Xia Yan sat down beside him. She pulled up the hands that were wrapped in white cloth and placed them by her lips, softly saying, Chao, don't worry, mother will definitely avenge you. Lin Lang stood to one side and asked, Furen, are you really going to be a matchmaker for eldest miss and second young master Li? How could that be possible? Xia Yan smiled sinisterly. I want her to be Li Yang's concubine for the rest of her life. She can forget about the title of official wife. I want her to lose all standing and reputation, and become a plaything for the Li family's father and son. I want her to marry into the Li family and suffer for the rest of her life. Lin Lang could not help but shiver. She only heard Xia Yan lightly laugh and say, "Second young Master Li's official wife? In your dreams." The incident at Baihua Lu in the capital seemed to have spread overnight through the streets and alleys. These past few days, the Jiang family had become the hottest topic of discussion in the capital, but in the end, it was all just a joke. In Jining Wang Fu, a young man dressed in an ink-colored rain-patterned crane cloak stood by the window, making his posture even more tall and straight like jade. A snow-white pigeon flew in from outside the window and landed in the palm of his hand. From the pigeon's leg, he removed a note tied with a red thread. The pigeon's red bean-like eyes stared at him. He stretched out his finger and stroked the snow pigeon's head. The snow pigeon chirped happily, flapped its wings, and flew into the blue sky. Xiao Xiao unfolded the note and lightly frowned. He knocked on the table, and suddenly, two men dressed in black appeared in the room. "Master," one of them took the lead to speak, "we have investigated." This subordinate followed the errand boy of the Imperial College. The letter came from the upper echelons of Jiang Quan Fu in the capital, and the person who delivered the letter was eldest Miss Jiang's personal maid. However, we did not find any connection between the two. "I understand, you may leave," Xiao Xiao said lightly. The room resumed its silence. Yi Feng stood behind Xiao Xiao and thought for a moment. The previous rumors were also spread by this eldest Miss Jiang. "Master, this eldest Miss Jiang's identity is really suspicious." "She is not a traitor," Xiao Xiao said. When he had found out that it was Jiang Wan, he had also been very surprised. Generally, only the people close to the emperor knew about the emperor's palace examination questions. Jiang Wan was only a girl in her boudoir. In any case, it was impossible for her to be a traitor in the palace. However, there were indeed many things about her that did not make sense. For example, previously in Assistant Minister Shen Fu, she even knew about the most secretive secret passage. He had 300,000 embroidered guards under him, and there was never any information that he could not collect. However, he could not find anything suspicious about this eldest Miss Jiang who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It was as if she should have known all those secrets. He had also heard about the incident at Baihua Lu in the capital last night. Recently, the Jiang Fu had been in a lot of trouble, and it seemed that it had all started with this eldest Miss Jiang's return to the Fu. As it turned out, the embroidered guards found the manservant who had been by Jiang Chao's side last night at Baihua Lu. He also admitted that he had taken someone's money and deliberately lured Jiang Chao there. In the end, the spearhead was pointed at Jiang Ruan. He could not help but frown. There are some things that don't make sense. Continue to investigate and see what relationship she has with eighth brother. If she was Xian Li's chess piece, then it was a different matter. Yi Feng thought for a moment, what about the second miss of the Jiang Fu? She came again a few days ago, and Steward Lin chased her out. "Don't bother with her," Xiao Xiao said lightly. Yi Feng shrugged and did not speak anymore. At home, when Li Dong received Jiang Quan's invitation, he also shook his head and said, "Strange, what does Jiang Quan mean by this? Normally, we don't have much of a relationship, so why would he suddenly send an invitation?" Li Dong had a big belly, and the beautiful concubine beside him was feeding him grapes as she said, "Perhaps he wants to cling on to Laoi." Li Yang's lecherous eyes were currently looking at Li Dong's newly entered concubine. When he heard this, he said, "That won't do. Yesterday, it was this Jiang Chao who caused me to lose face. I must find an opportunity to properly tidy him up." "Enough," Li Dong said, "your younger brother will be returning to the capital in a few days, so don't give him any trouble. What kind of person is that Jiang Chao, that he is worthy of you bickering with him?" Li Yang still wanted to say something, but the beautiful concubine giggled when she heard this. This servant does not know what kind of person Jiang Chao is, but before this servant entered the Fu, this servant had heard of the Jiang family's two daughters. Both of them are peerless beauties. When Li Yang heard this, his eyes brightened. Is what you said true? Of course it is true. This servant would not dare to deceive young master. The beautiful concubine smiled tenderly and said, the eldest miss of the Jiang family is as charming as a demon, while the second miss of the Jiang family is as elegant as a fairy. Moreover, their talents are unparalleled. This is a fact that everyone in the capital knows. Eldest young master usually disdains the daughters of noble families, so I presume that you do not know this. I did not expect that Jiang Chao would have such two younger sisters. I would like to have a look at their elegance. A strange look flashed in Li Yang's eyes. Father, when did Jiang Quan send the invitation? Tomorrow. Li Dong looked at his son's eyes and knew full well, why, you also want to go to the Jiang family? With such beauty, I naturally want to have a look at their elegance. I want to see if the people in the capital are lying. Li Dong laughed somewhat vulgarly. Jiang Chao caused me to miss out on a peony. If these two younger sisters are beautiful enough, I will not bicker with him. You better open your eyes, Li Dong said, the Jiang family's young lady's status is there, and cannot be casually toyed with. I see that you are not young anymore. When are you going to marry a wife? Just in time, when you go to the Jiang Fu tomorrow, if you really take a fancy to any one of them, you can marry them and bring them home. I still do not want to marry a wife. Jiang Chao's face fell. After thinking for a while, he asked the beautiful concubine, how are the temperaments of these two sisters of the Jiang Fu? The eldest miss of the Jiang family has just returned to the capital and is not familiar with her. However, I have heard that she is also very graceful in her conduct, and looks gentle and graceful. The beautiful concubine smiled and said, the second miss of the Jiang family is naive and unaffected, and is ignorant of the ways of the world. Everyone in the capital knows this. Their temperaments are both not bad. Jiang Chao licked his lips. If I really want to marry a wife, it would be better to have the blessings of having two wives, which is also a wonderful thing. Chapter 68. That morning, Jiang Wan woke up early and ate the green stem porridge that Bai Ji brought. She saw Xu Xiang standing at the door looking in. Lian Xiao saw her and asked, what's the matter? Nubi met second miss. Xu Xiang smiled and said, she said that second miss has obtained a few bolts of satin and wants to invite eldest miss to her courtyard to choose 2 bolts of satin that you like. Lian Xiao said, got it. You can go and do your work. After Xu Xiang left, Lian Xiao told Jiang Ruan exactly what she had said. In the end, she asked, second young lady is really strange. Now that second young master is still in bed, he actually has the mood to invite young lady out. I'm afraid he came prepared. Jiang Ruan said lightly while fiddling with the embroidery in front of her, Lu Zhu, go and ask if anyone is coming today. Jiang Su would not invite her over for no reason, especially at this time. Since they clearly wanted to trick her, it was better to deal with it calmly. Lu Zhu left for a while and returned. Miss, Nubi asked the others in the courtyard. It turns out that Prime Minister Li is coming today. She looked at Jiang Ruan's expression and said uneasily, Nubi feels that this matter is a bit strange. Miss, do you want to decline? No need. Jiang Ruan replied without waiting for Lu Zhu to finish. She looked at Jiang Ruan in astonishment, only to see Jiang Ruan's charming eyes slightly squint. She said with a smile, I have long wanted to visit such an old friend. Her tone was cheerful. For some reason, Lu Zhu felt a chill all over her body. She looked at Jiang Ruan's eyes again and saw that they were bottomless. After a pause, Lu Zhu said, in that case, does Miss want to freshen up? Naturally. Jiang Wan smiled slightly. Lian Xiao, Bai Ji, stay in the courtyard today and help me with the embroidery. Call Xu Xiang in. In Yan Huayuan, Jiang Su was diligently washing up and dressing up. Last night, she had heard from Butterfly that Xia Yan was going to be a matchmaker for Jiang Wan. In her heart, she really could not understand why Xia Yan would want to introduce such a good marriage to Jiang Wan. Prime Minister Li was also an important minister of the court, and Lian was a young talent. As soon as she thought of how Jiang Yuan would be able to marry into the Li family in a grand and glorious manner, while her reputation would be completely ruined, and who knows what kind of family she would be betrothed to in the future, Jiang Su felt a burst of jealousy and hatred in her heart. Therefore, she was determined to dress up today. She had never seen the legendary second young master of the Li family. If she could make second young master of the Li family fall in love with her, even if she had to ruin Jiang Ruan's marriage, she would still be extremely happy. While Butterfly was fixing her hair, she said, "Miss better not go out, Furin ordered Miss to stay in the house today. Don't go anywhere. If something happens, who asked you to speak to master like this?" Jiang Su was somewhat impatient. "I know my own affairs very well. If you talk too much, I will send you out." Butterfly's hand paused for a moment and said nothing more. Li Dong and his son had arrived at the Jiang Fu and were currently in the main hall talking with Jiang Quan. Xia Yan also came out to welcome him. Li Dong's sticky gaze roamed over Xia Yan's body, his meaning unclear, as he said, "Official Jiang is truly blessed with women, to have such a lovely wife." Xia Yan's body stiffened, and she forced a smile as she agreed. Jiang Quan, on the other hand, was burning with rage. However, Li Dong was originally a master of debauchery, so he was helpless against him. He could only endure his anger and said, "Today, I took the liberty to invite you because I feel that it is a pity that I have not interacted with Li Darren after so many years as colleagues." Enough, Li Dong leaned back, his small eyes squinting on his fierce-looking fat face. "Let's not beat around the bush. I am afraid that official Jiang has something to discuss today. I wonder what it is." Jiang Quan had not expected that the other party would be so stubborn, and that he would speak without restraint. All his life, he had always maintained a high level of self-control, and had never met such a person. Unfortunately, he could not offend him. He felt a lump in his chest that he could not spit out, and for a moment, he was speechless. Seeing this, Xia Yan hurriedly stepped forward to smooth things over, and said with a smile, "Actually, it is nothing special. It is just that I have heard that the son of official Li's Fu is a handsome and talented young man. Thinking that our Fu's daughter is not young anymore, and has the intention of climbing up the social ladder, I have indeed thickened my face and come to take a look." She spoke so bluntly that Jiang Quan could not help but glance at Xia Yan. He only felt that this woman, who had always been as noble and pure as a lotus, would now say such shameless words. He felt inexplicably uncomfortable in his heart. Sitting to one side, Li Yang, who was bored to death, heard these words and grinned. From Madame's words, it seems that she wants to choose a husband for the young miss of the Fu. Ever since Xia Yan had said those words, Jiang Quan had admitted that the Jiang Fu had lost all face in front of the Li father and son. He simply shut his mouth tightly and refused to speak again. Xia Yan glanced at him and said with a smile, "Exactly." Li Yang also followed with a smile, "I wonder if Madame has taken a fancy to me or my second younger brother." Second young Master Li is a young and talented man, and eldest young Master Li is also dignified and dignified. Naturally, both are good. Xia Yan smiled as she tucked a lock of loose hair behind her ear. "But since eldest young Master Li has come, it is fate that we are together." Li Dong stared closely at Xia Yan and said, "Madame has a clever mouth and knows how to speak. I wonder if the young miss of the Fu is as beautiful as Madame." There was a hint of flirtation in these words. Xia Yan stiffened. Jiang Quan had already reached the end of his patience and was about to lash out angrily. Suddenly, he heard a crisp and clear female voice ring out, "Mother." Li Yang's eyes brightened and he turned his head to look at the door of the hall. He saw a beautiful young girl standing in front of the hall door. She had a rosy oval face and was dressed in a camellia yellow embroidered silk blouse embroidered with gold twining branches. She wore a pale white floral moon skirt and a primrose-colored brocade embroidered with plum, bamboo, and chrysanthemum embroidered on her body. Her elegant black hair was coiled into an elegant and unique gourd bun. Her hair was lightly gathered and slowly pinched, and in the midst of her cloudy temples, there was a fine silver bat flower. Her skin was like cream and she wore a coral bracelet on her hand. Around her waist was a half-moon water waistband, on which hung a small embroidered pouch. She wore shoes on her feet. Her entire person was as elegant and beautiful as a fairy. She seemed to have just noticed that there were outsiders in the hall and lowered her head somewhat shyly. After thinking for a moment, she still walked forward. Her fair little face was currently flushed red. As she walked closer, she saw a cinnabar-like red mole under her clear and pure eyes. She really was like a fairy who had descended to the earth. Father, mother, she paused, Su-er didn't know that guests had arrived. Ever since Xia Yan saw Jiang Su-su, her entire person had frozen in place. She somewhat sluggishly turned her head to look at the father and son of the Li family. Sure enough, she only saw the Li family's father and son's greedy gazes fall on Jiang Su-su. Their gazes were like those of hungry wolves, causing Xia Yan to involuntarily shiver. She made a prompt decision and immediately said, "Who taught you to behave like this? Go back to the house." Her tone was too harsh and Jiang Su-su seemed to be frightened. Her eyes immediately filled with tears and she looked at Li Yang, somewhat at a loss as to what to do. Being stared at by those eyes, Li Yang immediately felt as if half of his soul had left his body. He immediately said, "Miss Jiang did not do it on purpose, Furen does not need to punish her. Besides, father and I are not outsiders." His words were impudent and Xia Yan was already extremely anxious. Jiang Su-su frowned, only to hear Li Dong also say, "It's just a child, Furen does not need to worry too much." Jiang Su-su was sensitive enough to sense that something was amiss. When she looked at Jiang Quan and Xia Yan's gazes again, her heart became timid and she said, "If that's the case, Su-er will withdraw first." After saying this, she did not care about the gazes behind her and hurriedly ran away. When he could no longer see Jiang Su-su's back, Li Yang then retracted his gaze and asked, "That is the Fu's second Mississippi sure enough, hearing about her is not as good as seeing her in person." "Su-er is still young," Jiang Quan stopped him and said, "For the time being, I have not thought about the matter of engagement. I am talking about Ruan-er." Xia Yan hurriedly chimed in, "That's right, Su-er's temperament is mischievous. In fact, Ruan-er's temperament and appearance are first class." Li Dong and his son looked at each other. Li Yang said, "There is no need to be impatient. I can see that the second Jiang Miss is indeed a rare beauty." Xia Yan was anxious and absent-mindedly exchanged a few words with the father and son of the Li family. After lunch, when they were intoxicated with wine, Jiang Quan and Li Dong discussed some matters of the court. Li Yang and Xia Yan then withdrew. Li Yang suggested that they go to the garden for a stroll. Although it was not in accordance with the rules, after all, his family's power was monstrous, so he agreed. Xia Yan called Lin Lang over, "You go find Shu Xiang immediately and bring Jiang Ruan out." A trace of ruthlessness flashed in her eyes, "For my Su-er, you will suffer for the rest of your life." Jiang Ruan was wearing a newly made camellia yellow brocade robe with 10 different kinds of embroidered patterns. Lu Zhu draped a crimson patterned jade brocade cloak over her shoulders. Her hair was casually combed into a tassel bun and she even wore a thin silver hairpin inlaid with jasmine flowers. With just a little makeup, she was already bright and beautiful. Shu Xiang, who was at the side, smiled and said, "Miss is really beautiful, just like a fairy." "Fairy?" Jiang Ruan laughed lightly, "I did not come from the heavens. She was an evil ghost who had returned from hell. What she wanted to do was to destroy the fairy in everyone's eyes. How could she be a fairy?" Shu Xiang did not quite understand her words, but Lu Zhu said, "Miss is also dressed up too grandly. Could it be that there is an honored guest coming to the Fu today? But it is only to rest in second Mrs. Courtyard." Shu Xiang's heart jumped, and she secretly raised her eyes to look at Jiang Ruan's expression, but she saw that Jiang Ruan's expression was normal. It's just that the weather today is not bad, so my mind is a little more active. There are no honored guests in the Fu, and even if there are, it is not someone that a girl can meet. Xu Xiang lowered her head even more. She did not know why, but there was a faint sense of unease in her heart. Jiang Ruan looked at her and smiled. Both Lu Zhu and I have never been to Su Xian Yuan. On the contrary, you usually run around outside, so you should know. The Jiang Fu was not big, but it was not small either. Since returning to the Fu, Jiang Ruan had not gone to Jiang Su's courtyard even once. Xu Xiang did not understand the meaning behind Jiang Ruan's words, and even someone as calm as her could not help but feel a trace of doubt. She paused before saying, "This servant has been there once or twice, so I can roughly remember." Jiang Ruan smiled, "Then I will have to trouble you to lead the way." Xu Xiang suppressed the strange feeling in her heart and curtsied, "Miss, please follow this servant." Along the way, Xu Xiang led the way in front, while Jiang Ruan and Lu Zhu walked behind. Half of Lu Zhu's body blocked Jiang Ruan's side, and she stared at Xu Xiang's back with some vigilance. Jiang Ruan, on the other hand, was unperturbed, and the smile on her lips was serene and tranquil. When they reached the entrance of Su Xian Yuan, Xu Xiang stopped and said, "This is Su Xian Yuan." Jiang Ruan glanced at the entrance of the courtyard. Even though she was only at the entrance of the courtyard and had not entered the house, she could clearly feel that it was different from Wanzhou. Not to mention that Su Xian Yuan was spacious, every part of the garden was meticulously arranged, and at a glance, one could see that it was infinitely romantic. Compared to Jiang Su's Su Xian Yuan, Wanzhou was not even comparable to a servant's room. Jiang Ruan followed Xu Xiang to a room in Jiang Su's courtyard. When she pushed the door open, it was actually a small guest room. On a small table, there was a teapot and teacups. Butterfly stood at the same spot and apologized, "Miss has just gone out and has not returned yet. I will have to trouble eldest Miss to wait for a while, this servant will go and urge her." "No matter, you go." Jiang Ruan smiled politely, "Xu Xiang, Lu Zhu, you don't have to stay here. Follow Butterfly to find second sister." Xu Xiang was startled and looked at Jiang Ruan with some suspicion. Jiang Ruan smiled and said, "Could it be that you are afraid that I will run away?" "Don't worry, I will be here." Xu Xiang's heart trembled. She did not know why, but in front of this second miss, she always felt some inexplicable fear. With a glance from that pair of coquettish eyes, she felt as if all the thoughts in her heart had been exposed to the world, and it was extremely uncomfortable. Lu Zhu glanced at Jiang Ruan worriedly, then bowed and retreated with Xu Xiang and Butterfly. After the three of them had left, Jiang Ruan stood up, and the smile on her lips faded as she gently pushed the door open. Su Xian Yuan was quiet, and unexpectedly, there was not a single person. She leaned on the vermilion pillar in front of the door and smiled faintly. Xia Yan had actually sent everyone away from Su Xian Yuan. Did she really want her to be in a state where she could neither live nor die? Unfortunately, the taste of hopelessness and helplessness, once was enough. She smiled coldly, turned around, and walked into another room. Just a moment later, she heard the sound of messy footsteps coming from outside. The footsteps were faint and weak, and it sounded like a drunkard was stumbling along. Jiang Ruan pushed open the door and quietly stood in the same spot. Li Yang was in the mood to drink, and when he was strolling in the garden, he happened to see a pretty good-looking servant girl. He hugged her affectionately, but he did not expect that the servant girl would struggle free. He did not know whether it was intentional or not, but she led him all the way here. When he reached the front of the courtyard, the servant girl had disappeared. He was somewhat muddle-headed from drinking, and could vaguely see the scenery in front of him. Seeing that the small courtyard was decorated in a fresh and elegant manner, with the words Su Xian Yuan written on it, his heart skipped a beat, and he actually forgot where he had been born. He only knew that this must be the boudoir of some young lady. Suddenly, the corners of his mouth rose into a smile, and he staggered forward. But at this moment, Li Yang saw a young lady dressed in red standing at the door. This young lady had a graceful figure, and she stood ramrod straight. Although he could not see her face clearly, his intuition told him that she was a stunning beauty. Li Yang did not care about anything else, and he shouted, "Little beauty." The young lady dressed in red turned around and entered the room. Li Yang's lust was aroused, and he immediately followed her inside, calling out, "Beauty, don't run." When he entered the room, he felt a lingering fragrance at the tip of his nose. He stared blankly for a moment, and then looked around. There was smoke everywhere, and he could not see anything clearly. He anxiously asked, "Beauty, where are you?" "Second young Master Li, you've really scared Su-er." A gentle and beautiful voice sounded in his ear. Li Yang's heart skipped a beat, and Jiang Su's clear and beautiful face appeared in front of him. He was so happy that he hurriedly turned around and hugged her. "Su-er is so proactive, it really moves me." The young lady dressed in red looked at him quietly. Li Yang tried his best to open his eyes, but still felt that her face was blurry. At this moment, he did not care, and was about to fiercely kiss this person. Unexpectedly, the young lady suddenly smiled. "Second young Master Li, Su-er has a gift for you." Li Yang had seen countless people, but he had never met such an interesting woman. She clearly had the appearance of a fairy, but she had taken the initiative to make such a lewd and slutty move. At this moment, his interest was aroused, and he asked, "What gift?" The young lady softly said, "The gift is, go die." After saying this, the hand that was hidden behind her raised the vase and ruthlessly smashed it towards him. Li Yang did not expect that the beautiful woman would suddenly become a deadly shura. Caught off guard, he suffered a heavy blow, and blood immediately flowed from his head. His body swayed, and he collapsed. Jiang Wan looked at Li Yang's weary appearance on the ground, and the smile on her lips was indifferent. She squatted down and played with the broken pieces of the vase in her hand. Suddenly, she smiled lightly. The father and son, Li Dong and Li Yang, were the most disgusting. The two of them kept catamites in the Prime Minister's fu, and played with young boys and girls. Everyone in the court knew about this. To deal with such shameless people, reputation was not the most important thing. In her previous life, before she died, she only knew that Li Dong played with Pei-er, but she did not know whether this Li Yang had a share. Even if he hadn't, it was not too much for a son to repay his father's debts. She patted the broken pieces of porcelain on Li Yang's face. "Young Master Li, I gave you a gift, shouldn't you return one?" After a while, Jiang Wan walked out of the room. Just as she walked to the entrance of Su Xian Yuan, she heard the voice of a manservant. Young Master, where are you?" It was Li Yang's manservant. Jiang Wan paused, but it was already too late to hide. Her mind was racing, but she still could not think of a solution. Suddenly, she heard the manservant cry out in alarm, and then there was no more movement. After muttering to herself for a while, Jiang Wan walked out of the courtyard. She saw a manservant lying on the ground a few steps away from the entrance. He seemed to have fallen and fainted. Jiang Wan frowned and raised her head to look at her surroundings. She did not see anything, so she walked past the fainted manservant and calmly left. On the tree, the black-clothed youth played with the stone in his hand. His long eyelashes were lowered, covering his thoughtful gaze. He had only come to the Jiangfu to investigate Xian Li's matter, but he had seen an unexpected scene. The eldest daughter of the Jiang family seemed to have some old grudge with the Li family's second young master. Her actions were ruthless, but there was not a trace of hesitation. It was really shocking. Xu Xiang waited in the garden for a while before she lifted her feet and walked in the direction of Su Xian Yuan. She had only walked halfway when she saw Lu Zhu running over in a panic. Xu Xiang hurriedly asked, "What's the matter? You look so anxious, did something happen?" "No, nothing." Lu Zhu's expression was evasive. You should return to Ruanju first, I still have something to do. She then hurriedly ran away. Seeing Lu Zhu's appearance, Xu Xiang's heart calmed. After thinking for a while, she walked in another direction. After Jiang Quan and Li Dong finished discussing official matters, they casually strolled around the Jiang Fu, casually talking about the marriage alliance between the two Fu. Although Li Dong was lecherous, he was also an old fox. His words were always full of Tai Chi. Xia Yan, who was accompanying him, occasionally chimed in, but Li Dong's attitude was gloomy and unclear. He only said that it was still up to Li Yang. As the three of them walked, they got closer and closer to Su Xian Yuan. At this moment, a delicate and pretty maid suddenly rushed out. Her expression was full of panic. When she saw Xia Yan, it was as if she had seen her savior. She knelt on the ground and cried, I beg Furen to save my family's eldest miss. When she finished speaking, she raised her head and stared blankly, as if she had just realized that Li Dong was still there. Xia Yan looked at the maid in astonishment and frowned. What do you mean? What happened to Ruan? The maidservant seemed to be frightened and didn't dare to speak. Xia Yan became even more anxious. What exactly happened? Just as she finished speaking, they heard a woman's cry of alarm come from the room in Su Xian Yuan. That voice was extremely mournful, causing everyone present to shiver involuntarily. Xia Yan stared blankly and did not say anything more. She immediately walked quickly towards Su Xian Yuan. Lin Lang followed by her side. It was quiet outside Su Xian Yuan, and there was not a single person in the courtyard. Xia Yan first went to the small guest room, which was quiet. The teapot and teacups on the table had not been touched. It was still the same as before. Lin Lang stared blankly, and Xia Yan also stared blankly. They only heard another woman's cry of alarm come from outside. This time, they could hear it clearly. It was coming from Jiang Su's room. For a moment, Xia Yan did not have time to wonder why the location had become Jiang Su's room. She did not know why she had a bad premonition in her heart. She pushed Lin Lang away and immediately rushed into Jiang Su's room. As soon as she entered the room, she smelled a thick and nauseating stench of blood. Xia Yan's eyes twitched. The meandering bloodstains on the floor were a ghastly sight. The sound of a broken-down sobbing could be heard. When it reached Xia Yan's ears, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She took a few steps forward. Wasn't the one crying in the room Jiang Su? At Jiang Su's feet, Li Yang's head was full of blood. His original appearance could not be seen. His eyes were tightly shut. At this moment, it was likely that the odds were against him. No, Xia Yan's eyes widened. The sound of footsteps came from behind the door. Before she could stop them, she heard Jiang Quan's voice. What happened? The voice stopped abruptly, followed by a blood-curdling scream. My son. Li Dong's eyes widened in disbelief. In a few steps, he rushed over to Li Yang's side and shook his body. My son, wake up. However, Li Yang did not seem to feel anything. Li Dong lowered his head and his gaze fell on the lower half of Li Dong's body. From the waist down, the fine silk robe was already stained with blood. His gaze moved downwards and fixed on a badly mutilated thing at the side. Then, he let out a low, pained howl. Anyone who saw their own son being castrated would not remain indifferent. Li Dong raised his head again, his eyes bloodshot. Jiang Quan, I want you to pay with your life. It wasn't me, it wasn't me. Jiang Su had long been trembling in fear. Her face was full of tears. He became like this the moment I entered the room. It wasn't me, it really wasn't me. However, no one could believe her words. Judging from the scene before them, if one were to say that Li Yang's lust had attacked Jiang Su's heart, then in a fit of rage, Jiang Su had smashed his head with a vase and then angrily castrated him. This was the most convincing explanation. Xia Yan argued, no, it couldn't have been Su-er. Su-er is timid and would not treat second young masterly like this. Officially, don't panic. The murderer must still be hiding in the room. Where's Ruan-er? Su-er, aren't you with Ruan-er? Where did Ruan go? She thought that this matter was definitely Jiang Ruan's fault, and that Jiang Ruan had most likely not left the room. Li Dong raised his head. Before he could speak, he heard a gentle female voice coming from outside. Father, mother, what happened? Why are they all in second sister's room? Xia Yan's body stiffened. She saw Jiang Ruan standing at the entrance of the courtyard, dressed in a fiery red dress. Today, she had even put on some makeup, making her look extremely beautiful. In comparison, Jiang Su, who was a complete mess of crying, cut an incomparably sorry figure. Ruan-er, weren't you and Su-er in the room choosing satin? Why did you go out? Xia Yan asked anxiously. I waited for second sister for a long time, but she didn't come. I thought that I might as well take the initiative to look for her. Who knew that I wouldn't be able to find her? Jiang Ruan said, so I let Lu Zhu follow me to the garden to pick a few red plums. I thought that they would look good in a vase later. She waved her hand. Sure enough, there were a few red plums. Xia Yan collapsed to the ground. Li Dong's forehead was in pain. Looking at Li Yang lying unconscious on the ground, a trace of ruthlessness flashed across Li Dong's face. He shouted, Slut, I want you to pay with your life for my sons. Before anyone could see his movements clearly, they could only see the sharp broken pieces of the vase in his hand. Jiang Su jumped back in fright. Li Dong's body was fat and not very agile. Jiang Su dodged by a hair's breadth. She felt a burning pain on the right side of her face. Reaching out to touch it, she found that her hand was covered in blood. Jiang Quan shouted, impudent. The guards in the courtyard desperately pulled Li Dong away. Jiang Su was already covering her face and crying loudly. Looking at Jiang Su's bloody face, Xia Yan's heart ached and she fainted. Quickly call the physician. Jiang Quan said anxiously. Li Dong also ordered someone to lift Li Yang up. Return to the Fu immediately. Before leaving, he fiercely glared at Jiang Quan. I will not let this matter rest. Jiang Quan, I will make you pay the price. After watching Li Dong and his entourage leave, Jiang Quan rubbed his forehead. Because he was worried about Jiang Su and Xia Yan, he hurriedly left for Yanhua Yuan. For a moment, Su Xian Yuan returned to its previous emptiness. Lu Zhu stood by Jiang Ruan's side in silence. Amidst the bloodstains on the ground, Jiang Ruan smiled slightly and said softly, Shu Xiang, are you not coming in? Shu Xiang's face was deathly pale. She looked at Jiang Ruan as if she was looking at a demon. Seeing Lu Zhu's expression just now, she thought that the matter had been settled, so she hurriedly reported it to Xia Yan. Who knew that the one who had fallen into the trap was Jiang Su? It was too much of a stretch to say that all of this was a coincidence. You must remember the road to Su Xian Yuan well. Don't forget it for the rest of your life. Jiang Ruan smiled at her. Right? Lu Zhu could not hide her disdainful gaze, but Shu Xiang's back was drenched in cold sweat. She knew that this time, Xia Yan would not let her off lightly. That young lady dressed in red seemed to blend harmoniously with the bloodstains on the ground. There was not the slightest trace of panic on her face. She smiled faintly and turned to leave. For the Jiang family in the capital, this day was bound to be an extremely eventful one. In just a few short days, Jiang Chao had lost a finger, Jiang Su had been disfigured, Xia Yan had fainted from anger, and the old Jiang madam was bedridden. It was unknown when, but the huge Jiang Fu had begun to show signs of collapsing. This was too subtle and could not be taken seriously. However, Those rotten things were slowly taking root, waiting for the day when they would break through the soil and completely nibble away at this splendid and magnificent food. Jiang Wan sat in front of the table and drank tea. The newly brewed 100 flowers honey from the zhuangzi was distributed to every courtyard. Together with a few freshly picked red plums in the courtyard, the simple flower tea had a special taste. Despite the incident that had happened in the afternoon, Jiang Dan made a trip over at night. Seeing Jiang Ruan's appearance, she anxiously asked, "Dejie, today I stayed in the courtyard and did not go out. I heard that you were also present. Was it really second younger sister who smashed second young Master Li's head?" Jiang Ruan looked at her and smiled. "Oh, second younger sister's information is quite flexible, but it seems that you do not believe it." No, Jiang Dan hurriedly waved her hands. "It's just that second older sister has always been gentle. I did not expect that you would have the guts to injure second young Master Li." As she spoke, she probed Jiang Ruan's expression. "When a rabbit is anxious, it will also bite." Jiang Ruan unhurriedly said, "People who usually look docile can also have a fierce side. It's just that we cannot see it." Jiang Dan paused and smiled. Dejie is right. After talking for a while, Jiang Dan timidly said goodbye and left. Lian Xiao sent Jiang Dan to the courtyard gate. When she returned, she said, "This fourth young lady is really strange. It seems that Furen does not treat her well, but she eagerly inquires about second young lady." She shook her head. "Isn't she too kind?" Jiang Wan smiled but did not say anything. Her feelings towards Jiang Dan were already very vague. She only knew that ever since third Yinyang died, Jiang Dan had been raised by Zhao Mei's side. At that time, Jiang Dan was not as weak as she was now. Although she was still very timid, she was extremely obedient. Zhao Mei also liked her very much. Although there were times when Jiang Wan felt displeased by Jiang Dan's struggle for favor, it was understandable that Jiang Dan was so pitiful after losing her mother. However, Jiang Xing, who had always been gentle, did not like Jiang Dan. Although he did not show it, there was always a faintly discernible politeness and alienation. In her previous life, Jiang Dan seemed to have married a son of a noble family as a concubine. She was a concubine's daughter, so there was no need to think about the position of a proper wife in a better family. She was not very clear about what happened after that. She did not know whether Jiang Dan had contributed in the matter of her becoming a demoness who brought calamity to the country. As she spoke, she heard someone talking outside. Lu Zhu pushed the door open and came in. She pouted angrily towards the outside. Xu Xiang just came back. Look at her face, it's full of palm prints. She can't even walk steadily. Her complexion looks terrible. Jiang Wan smiled. Xu Xiang had messed up such a matter today. Xia Yan would not let her off easily. However, she was, after all, a chess piece placed in Ruanju. For the time being, she could not bear to kill her, so she spared Xu Xiang's life. "Young lady," Baiji asked, "this servant does not understand one thing." At that time, Furen sent over 4 servant girls. Why did young lady give special treatment to this Xu Xiang? You did not pay as much attention to the others. Perhaps it's an old grudge. Jiang Wan said in a low voice, "Lu Zhu, other than the Li family's father and son, no one else came to the fu today. This servant has asked many people." Indeed, there was no one else. Lu Zhu said, "Could young lady have seen wrongly?" Jiang Wan shook her head. Li Yang's manservant would definitely not have fainted on purpose. If it was not an outsider, then it could only be that someone in the fu was secretly helping her. But that also meant that everything she had done today had fallen into the eyes of others. That person had helped her, but it was not necessarily a friend or an enemy. Who could it be? Jiang Wan muttered to herself. In Yan Huayuan, Xia Yan smashed the last celadone teacup on the table. The surrounding servant girls did not dare to breathe too loudly. Lin Lang stepped forward to persuade her, Furin, don't get angry and harm your health. With a pa sound, Xia Yan gave her a backhand slap. Immediately, 5 distinct palm prints appeared on Lin Lang's face. She did not dare to move. When the surrounding servant girls saw that even the most respected Lin Lang had suffered a slap, they were even more motionless and stood rooted to the ground. Xia Yan's heart was almost bursting with anger. Thinking of the doctor's last words, her heart ached even more. Your daughter's wound is quite deep, and she has lost a lot of blood. She is fine now, but I'm afraid that there will be scars in the future. Jiang Su's plain face was devastatingly beautiful, but now that it had been disfigured, how could she marry into a noble family in the future? She hated Li Yang, who had died in Jiang Su's boudoir. She also hated Li Dong, who had disfigured Jiang Su's face. But the one she hated the most was Jiang Ruan. She did not believe that everything that had happened today had nothing to do with Jiang Ruan. It was obviously a foolproof setup. As long as Jiang Ruan entered the small guest room and drank the tea on the table, Li Yang entered the courtyard and did that with Jiang Ruan. Then, Jiang Quan and Li Dong would have seen through it. Jiang Ruan's reputation would have been ruined, and she could only enter the Li family as a lowly concubine. But she had never expected that Jiang Ruan would not even enter the guest room and drink the tea. For some unknown reason, Li Yang had collapsed in Jiang Su's room, and Jiang Su had returned to her room. Now, Li Dong's heart most likely hated Jiang Su to the core. No matter how much he hated Li Dong, Li Yang had been injured to such an extent and had been castrated in the Jiangfu. Who knew what methods Li Dong would use to take revenge? As she thought of this, Xia Yan felt a burst of lingering fear. This won't do, I have to think of a way. Xia Yan paced around the room a few times and made up her mind. She walked to the desk and ordered Lin Lang to grind the ink. I want to write a letter to father and let him give me some ideas. At this moment, Jiang Quan was in the study, rubbing his forehead. In just a few days, a few strands of white hair had sprouted from his temples. His most beloved son and daughter had met with such a disaster, and he was extremely angry. Moreover, the other party was Li Dong, the 8th prince's man. Hong Ying stood behind him and gently massaged his scalp with her jade-like hands. In a warm voice, she said, Master, don't worry. Second Miss and second young master will get better. Jiang Quan dejectedly lowered his eyes. That pair of usually high-spirited face was full of depression. The pair of children that he was most proud of were now bedridden, and it was feared that they would be left with disabilities. He remembered Xia Yan's words. The only D son and D daughter in the Fu were now in such a state. Who else would be left in the Jiang Fu in the future? I, Jiang Quan, have actually fallen to this point, unable to even protect my children. Hong Ying's gentle voice rang in his ears. Master, you are wrong. Isn't there still eldest young master and eldest miss? Jiang Xing and Jiang Ruan. Jiang Quan was slightly startled. Jiang Xing had left the Fu for many years, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. On the other hand, Jiang Ruan reminded him of the Jiang Ruan he had seen in Su Xin Yuan today. The young girl with light makeup was slender and elegant, and she already had a slightly blossoming elegance. That fiery red dress reminded him of Xiao Mei when she was young. However, compared to Xiao Mei, Jiang Ruan was less reckless and impulsive, and more gentle and bright. At first, he had loathed Xiao Mei. Because of Xiao Mei's devotion, and because Xiao Mei was a daughter of a noble family, he had no choice but to marry her, but he had never loved her. He knew that Xiao Mei was the daughter of a military general, and that she was learning the 4 arts for him. He did not love Xiao Mei, so even Jiang Xing and Jiang Ruan could not share his love. Now that Jiang Chao and Jiang Su had met with an accident, was this heaven's punishment for him? Li Dong will not leave the matter at that. Jiang Quan sighed deeply. With Li Yang's current appearance, I am afraid that he will ask to marry Su. Hong Ying's hand paused. Ask to marry. If Li Yang dies, then so be it. If he doesn't die, with that appearance, I am afraid that in the future, no good family will be willing to marry their daughter to him. Jiang Quan said, he hates Su-er to the bone. If he asks to marry her, he will certainly torture her in every possible way. Su-er will beg to die, and will not be happy for the rest of her life. Master, are you willing to break off relations with Prime Minister Li for the sake of second miss? Hong Ying asked. No, Jiang Quan said, if the Jiang Fu wants to climb the 8th prince's coattails and break off relations with the Li family, this matter will most likely fail. Then, Master, are you willing to marry second miss into the Li family? Hong Ying probed. Su-er is my most beloved daughter. I am absolutely unwilling to send her into that kind of pit of fire. Jiang Quan said, even if Li Yang is in good health, I will not marry Su-er to him, not to mention that he is now a cripple. Master, do you have any ideas? Hong Ying had a faint guess in her heart, and her voice became increasingly gentle. I am not willing to send Su-er over. If we can compensate them with Ruan-er, perhaps we can quell the anger of Li Dong and his son. Jiang Quan said, Ruan-er is already beautiful. As she grows older, I am afraid that her appearance will become even more outstanding. If we compensate them with my Jiang Fu's innocent daughter, perhaps they will feel the Jiang Fu's sincerity. Even though she had already guessed a little, Hong Ying was still shocked speechless. Jiang Quan could actually think of using Jiang Ruan's lifetime of pain in exchange for Jiang Su-er's release. How could there be such a father in this world? How could he treat his own flesh and blood in such a different manner? If she had not heard it with her own ears, Hong Ying would not have believed that these words had come from Jiang Quan's mouth. She could not help but ask, Master, do you know what it means for eldest miss to marry over? It meant that Jiang Ruan would become a tool for the Li family's father and son to vent their anger. Li Yang and Li Dong would transfer their hatred of Jiang Su onto Jiang Ruan, and Jiang Ruan would live a life of humiliation. Jiang Quan averted his eyes. I also have no choice. As the eldest sister, it is only right and proper for Ruan-er to love her younger sister. He spoke so matter-of-factly that Hong Ying felt a chill in her heart. She forced a smile and said, Master, it is better to wait for second miss to wake up before making any plans. We do not know how second young Master Li is doing. Jiang Quan was startled and said, You are right, we will discuss this matter in the future. For now, let's wait for Su-er to wake up. You may leave. Hong Ying hurriedly retreated, and when she walked out of the room, she still felt a lingering fear. Thinking of Jiang Quan's words just now, she still shuddered. Everyone in the capital had heard of the disgusting methods of the Li family's father and son, yet Jiang Quan was able to propose marrying Jiang Ruan over without batting an eyelid. It was truly chilling. Jiang Ruan had once extended an olive branch to her, but Hong Ying herself had always been cautious and did not easily form alliances with others. However, she could also sensitively feel that ever since Jiang Ruan had returned to the Fu, there had been a quiet change in the direction of the Jiang Fu. Eldest Jiang Miss looked gentle and pleasant, but with all the things that had happened in the past few days, in the end, she was safe and sound, while Xia Yan and her mother had suffered. Hong Ying had come from a brothel, so she would not be so naive as to believe that all of this was due to Jiang Ruan's luck. Chapter 69. For the first time since the beginning of spring, it rained. Rainwater dripped down the eaves and onto the flagstones of the courtyard. The sky was gloomy as if it was about to collapse. Xia Yan sat on the edge of the bed, picked up the steamed cheese, and moved closer to the young girl. I don't want to eat. Jiang Su turned her head away. Her pair of beautiful and moving eyes were filled with anger. On her jade-white face, there was a slanted cut below her right eye. Although medicine had been applied, the muscles on the cut were still sinister. Coincidentally, the cut had cut open the blood-colored mole. At first glance, She looked like an Azura. Su, be good. Eat something and your wound will heal quickly, Xia Yan said gently. Jiang Su knocked over the porcelain bowl in Xia Yan's hand and said fiercely, what good? How can my current appearance be good? It would be better to just die. As she spoke, she could not help but cough twice, and the twisted right side of her face looked even more frightening. Xia Yan patted her back with heartache. Do you want mother's heart to ache to death? Rest assured, Su, mother will definitely find the best doctor and leave no trace. Do you think I will believe your words? Jiang Su looked at her, her face full of disappointment. If it wasn't for your idea to let Xu Xiang lead Li Yang to Su Xian Yuan, how could things have developed to this stage? It's all because of you. It's all because of you. As she spoke, her gaze was crazed, and her emotions were so intense that she almost lost control. Enough! Xia Yan suddenly exclaimed in a low voice, then quickly whispered, do you want everyone to hear about this? Jiang Su's throat was hoarse, but she still stared at her. Xia Yan's voice suddenly became stern, put away that desperate look of yours. What do you think you can change? If Jiang Wan saw you like this, she would probably be very happy. If your father saw you like this, he would only be disappointed. If you want revenge, stop crying and listen to me. Her tone was stern, and Jiang Su was startled for a moment. She slowly calmed down and said, what should I do? Seeing her like this, Xia Yan knew that Jiang Su had listened to her words. She breathed a sigh of relief and said, your second brother has lost a finger. This matter is very strange. I don't know what happened to your second brother, but Jiang Wan can't escape the involvement of Li Yang and you. She actually played both you and me. I can't wait to peel off her skin and drink her blood. Jiang Su clenched her fists tightly, her gaze sinister. She has harmed me to such an extent, I can't accept it. Li Dong's family has too much power and influence. No matter what, I will not send you to the Li family. I have already written a letter to your maternal grandfather. If your maternal grandfather finds out about the current state of you and your second brother, Jiang Ruan's good days will come to an end. Jiang Su's eyes brightened. Maternal grandfather will avenge me. So now, you must properly recuperate from your injuries. Xia Yan looked at her and said gently, when your injuries are better, I will arrange for you to return to Xiafu. Xia Yan was born from the second wife of the Marquis of Yongding, Xia Cheng. At that time, Xia Cheng was just an obscure and unknown county magistrate. Because of Xia Yan's status, she could not marry Jiang Quan and become his official wife. Who would have thought that Xia Cheng's older brother would suddenly die of illness a few years ago, so the title of nobility would fall onto the shoulders of this bastard son. Following this, Xia Yan's status rose. In addition, Zhao Mei and General Zhao had broken off contact, so Xia Yan's status seemed to be more worthy of the position of Jiang Quan's official wife. Like Xia Yan, Xia Cheng was also a person who was protective of his own. If he knew that such a misfortune had befallen his two granddaughters, it was unknown what methods he would use to deal with Jiang Wan. After chatting with Jiang Su for a while, Xia Yan got up and left. When she reached the door, Xia Yan rubbed her forehead and asked, has Chao woken up? Lin Lang lowered her head and said, second young master woke up at noon. However, when he woke up, he lost his temper and chased all the servant girls out of the room, refusing to see anyone. Xia Yan took a deep breath. Let's go, I will go see him. The weather was gloomy and rainy, but Ruanju was as leisurely as ever, not the slightest bit affected by the gloomy weather. As Jiang Wan stood in front of the table, practicing her calligraphy, Baiji helped her grind the ink and said, Mrs. Calligraphy is getting better and better. You are illiterate, what are you saying? Lian Xiao said. Baiji's face reddened. After all, her mouth was not as sharp as Lian Xiao's. She could only lower her head and mumble, it just looks good. Jiang Wan put down her brush. Do you want to learn calligraphy? When Lian Xiao and Bai Ji heard this, they looked at her with surprise and joy. Of course we want to. Then in a few days, I will choose a few simple books. You should also learn to read. Following her, it was always better to be literate. Usually, when Lu Zhu dealt with matters outside, Lian Xiao and Bai Ji should also help her with some matters in the Fu. This servant thanks Mississippi, the two servant girls were naturally overjoyed. For servant girls, being literate was something that only the upper class could do. Jiang Wan helping them learn to read was something that they could not be more grateful for. Today, Miss ordered Lu Zhu to go out to retrieve the banknotes that were deposited at the Four Seas Bank. Why is this? Lian Xiao asked. Jiang Wan glanced at her. Although these two servant girls were loyal, their thoughts were too upright. In her early years, Lu Zhu had traveled extensively and had seen many bad things in the marketplace. Thus, she did not have to worry about using them. However, these two servant girls still did not dare to use them. Look at the rain. Jiang Wan looked out of the window. For a while, it is raining, but I do not know when it will stop. Miss is joking, Bai Ji said in surprise. It is just a rain at the beginning of spring. Who knows if it will stop tomorrow morning? But I feel that it will not stop. Jiang Wan shook her head. In her previous life, it was also this year that this rain started to fall. It continued to fall for a whole 3 months. The crops at the beginning of spring could not be sown, and floods were wreaking havoc. Many people's houses and fields were destroyed and submerged by the flood. Suddenly, there were many refugees in the capital. She remembered this incident clearly because at that time, the estate was also ravaged by floods. Because of the shortage of food, Zhang Lan's family was harsh on her usage to the point that it was almost cruel. Although her house was not destroyed, it was always damp. Every day, she dragged her hungry body to do rough and tiring work. One day, she was almost washed away by the flood. Fortunately, a rough and unskilled servant saw her and rescued her. She could never forget the look in Zhang Lan's family's eyes at that time. It was full of disappointment, and they wished that she could die in the water. At that time, Jiang Wan thought that Zhang Lan's family disliked her for taking up the family's food, so they wanted her to die. Now that she thought about it, if she had died in that flood, Zhang Lan's family would have received a large reward from Xia Yan. At that time, there were many refugees in the capital. The families did not have enough to eat. The refugees ran around everywhere, and when they could not get food, they robbed everywhere. The poor naturally did not have extra food, so they set their sights on the wealthy families in the capital. At that time, Zhao Yi, who was in charge of the city's garrison, led troops to suppress them, but was hacked to death by the refugees. At that time, the emperor, who was in charge of the imperial court, ordered the Zhao family to provide disaster relief. The Zhao family contributed 10,000 taels of silver, and the family's savings were almost emptied. From that time on, the Zhao family seemed to have begun to collapse. Jiang Wan found out about this matter after she entered the palace. At that time, Zhao Yi had inadvertently mentioned it when they were chatting. It was Xianli who had suggested to the emperor that General Zhao's family was wealthy, and perhaps they could use the silver to provide disaster relief. Jiang Wan had also asked Xianli about this matter, but Xianli's answer was that it was above the common people, but it was just a worldly possession. To be able to protect the lives of those refugees was also a good deed. Now that she thought about it, after that incident, Xianli's prestige in the imperial court increased, while the Zhao family weakened. Perhaps this was also part of his plan, and Zhao Yi's death was not that simple. How could a dignified garrison of the capital be hacked to death by unarmed rebels? Her gaze suddenly deepened. In this life, she did not intend to be strangers with the Zhao family. The Zhao family was her surveillance and support, so how could she allow others to bully and humiliate them like this? Even if the rain will not stop, why did Miss take out the silver? Bai Ji was puzzled. No matter what, Miss should still keep some silver by your side. What are you going to do now? I asked Lu Zhu to buy all the food in the capital, Jiang Ruan said indifferently. Miss, Lian Xiao's eyes widened, why did Miss buy so much food? Now that it was the beginning of spring, the new grain had not yet arrived, and all the old grain from last year was not expensive. 2,000 or 3,000 silver was enough to buy more than half of it. Those farmers were worried that they would not be able to sell their grain, so when they saw this, they would also sell all the grain. I was thinking that if the rain continued to fall, it would become a flood, and these grains would be valuable. Jiang Ruan smiled. Mississippi, Baizhi moved her lips, but in the end, she did not say anything. Jiang Ruan's words had never left any room for refutation. She was determined, and once she had decided on something, she would not waver. So even if Baizhi thought that Jiang Ruan's action was really inconceivable, she could only let her be. At this moment, Lu Zhu pushed the door open and walked in. When she saw Jiang Ruan, she smiled and said, Miss, the person I found has already bought all the grain and piled it up in a warehouse in the west of the city. The key is in this servant's hands. She handed the key to Jiang Ruan and smiled, because no one has come to buy the old grain these days, this servant has bought most of the rice and flour. You did very well. Jiang Ruan played with the exquisite and small silver key in her hand. However, Miss, Lu Zhu thought for a while, this servant saw 15 Yang at the entrance of the courtyard. She looked like she was going to come in, so this servant asked her, but she left again. I know. Jiang Ruan muttered to herself, since this is the case, let's go to 15 Yang's courtyard and sit for a while. Hong Ying was embroidering in the room. The weather was not very good, and the light was not very clear. After embroidering for a long time, she still felt that the embroidery was not satisfactory. She was really annoyed when she saw a maidservant come forward and say, Yin Yang, eldest miss is here. Eldest miss? She frowned slightly, not expecting Jiang Ruan to come. Other than Jiang Quan, no one else had ever set foot in this courtyard. She stood up, and Jiang Ruan happened to walk in. When she saw her, she smiled and said, So Yin Yang is embroidering, your embroidery is very good. Hong Ying followed her gaze and glanced at the embroidery on the table. It was embroidered in the shape of a pouch for Jiang Quan. The embroidery was of azure clouds and white cranes. The white cranes were vivid and lifelike, setting off the lofty artistic conception, and the colors were also very beautiful. It's just embroidery for fun, Hong Ying smiled and said, if eldest miss likes it, this servant will embroider one for eldest miss another day. Thank you very much, 15 Yang. Jiang Ruan smiled and accepted. She swept her gaze around the room and said, originally, everyone said that father dotes on 15 Yang the most, but I did not believe it. Now that I have seen it, I have no choice but to believe it. The room was exquisitely decorated, and the things placed on the shelf and table were all exquisite and valuable. Presumably, Jiang Quan had also put some thought into Hong Ying. Hong Ying was startled, and then she smiled and said, Master naturally dotes on Furen the most, eldest miss is joking. I never joke. Jiang Ruan smiled and said, Today, I have come to visit 15 Yang for no particular reason. Her expression was gentle, these past few days, the Fu has not been too peaceful, and second younger sister and second older brother have met with misfortune, but it is as if they have been cursed. I am thinking that the next one, will it be Ruan Yang's turn? Hong Ying's heart jumped when she heard this, and she looked at Jiang Ruan and asked, Eldest miss, why do you say this? Intuition. Jiang Ruan smiled, I do not have anyone close to me in the Fu, and mother passed away too early. Although mother treats me well, I already have second younger sister and second older brother. Her voice was slightly low, there are some words that I can only say to 15 Yang. If 15 Yang is the mistress of the Fu, how good would that be? A kind-hearted person like 15 Yang will certainly protect Ruan Yang in all aspects, and Ruan Yang will certainly repay 15 Yang, allowing the Jiang Fu to be harmonious and prosperous. 15 Yang pursed her lips, and for some reason, her heart was beating fiercely. She looked at Jiang Ruan inquiringly, and that pair of charming bright eyes looked at her with a smile. It was clearly as warm as flowing water, but it was like looking at flowers through a fog, and the emotions within could not be clearly seen. She had come from a brothel, and had seen many different kinds of people, and was even more capable of understanding the hearts of people. However, she could not understand this little girl in front of her, who was just over 10 years old. Eldest Miss really thinks that this concubine is qualified to be the mistress of the Jiangfu? She heard her own slightly trembling voice. Jiang Wan smiled as she picked up the teacup in front of her, and took a shallow sip. Why not? Hong Ying looked at her, and suddenly revealed a smile. Eldest Miss is so flattering this concubine does not know what to do. In fact, if Eldest Miss had not come to find this concubine today, this concubine would also have gone to meet Eldest Mississippi. Jiang Wan smiled at her, and Hong Ying continued, this concubine was chatting with Master yesterday, and he talked about the matter of the Li family's father and son. Eldest Miss also knows about the matter between eldest young Master Li and second Mississippi. Eldest young Master Li is like this now, presumably Prime Minister Li cannot tolerate second Miss, but Master does not want to shed all pretense of cordiality with Prime Minister Li, so he wants eldest Miss to replace second Miss in marrying into the Li family. After saying this, she carefully observed Jiang Ruan's expression, but saw that the expression on that bright and beautiful face had not changed, and the smile on her lips was still the same, as if she was wearing a perfect mask. Jiang Wan sighed softly, father dotes on second younger sister so much, it really makes me envious. Seeing this, Hong Ying said, this concubine is also anxious, it was clearly second Miss who caused this trouble, how can eldest Miss apologize? Moreover, that eldest young Master Li is now considered a cripple, if eldest Miss really marries over, it will certainly be unbearably painful. Jiang Wan muttered to herself for a moment, then smiled at Hong Ying, thank you 15 Yang for your advice, but it is difficult for me to interfere with father's decision. If he has really made up his mind, as a daughter of the Jiang family, 1 Yang can only accept. Hong Ying stared blankly, eldest Miss agrees to marry over. I agree, father agrees, I wonder if Li Darren agrees. Jiang Wan smiled lightly and stood up, there is not much time left, I should also return. Pausing, her gaze fell on the embroidery on the table, and she smiled, father dotes on 15 Yang, so it is natural for 15 Yang to care about father. However, 1 Yang still has to remind 15 Yang, if there are no children, 15 Yang, eldest Yin Yang, and second Yin Yang are actually the same. She smiled and finished the rest of her words, if there are children, without status, then the fate of the children and the Yin Yang will be the same. After Jiang Wan left for a long time, Hong Ying was still sitting in a daze. Seeing this, the maidservant beside her cautiously asked, Yin Yang? Hong Ying waved her hand, her expression full of exhaustion, and said in a low voice, what exactly does eldest Miss want to do? In the capital's Jinying Wangfu, Yi Feng stood in front of the desk and said, General Guan has sent back news that he will return to the court next month. Pausing, he continued, when this subordinate went out on a mission today, I heard from my subordinates that there has been a large-scale plundering of the surplus grain in the city recently. I am afraid that this is related to 8th Highness, so I paid attention and inquired about it. It was done by the maidservant of eldest Miss of the Jiangfu. He frowned, but I do not know what their purpose is. Xiao Xiao turned around, his heroic eyebrows slightly raised, making that elegant and handsome face look a bit more stern, and said, continue to inquire. Pay attention to the movements in Li Dongfu. Prime Minister Li. Yi Feng was surprised, Master wants to deal with him in advance? Xiao Xiao shook his head, the life of the eldest son of the Li family is at stake. This matter is related to the Jiang family, and the Jiang family does not want to incur enmity with the Li family. If my guess is correct, Jiang Quan should be making a move. Yi Feng thought for a moment, behind the Jiang family is the Xiao family, and the Xiao family is also on the 8th prince's side. Perhaps the 8th prince will step in. After all, the Xiao family and the Li family were both rare resources, and Xian Li would not let them go for nothing. He suddenly laughed, I really don't know how the 8th prince feels when he finds out that there is a rebellion in his own nest. In short, the eldest son of the Li family has fallen into a difficult situation, and second Miss Jiang has also done a good deed. By castrating Li Yang, no matter what, the Li family and the Jiang family will become enemies. Xiao Xiao did not correct Yi Feng's words. He recalled that day when Jiang Wan had used a piece of broken porcelain to cut off Li Yang's thing without the slightest hesitation. She was clearly a young girl in the boudoir, but when she saw a man's lower body, she did not have the slightest trace of embarrassment. There was only indifference in her eyes, and the way she looked at Li Yang was as if she was looking at a dead pig waiting to be slaughtered. Ever since he had been accepted into the genie guard at the age of 10, he had also walked step by step on blood. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he really would not have believed that a young girl in the boudoir could have a killer's gaze. This eldest daughter of Jiang Quan, how did she raise her? After a moment, Xiao Xiao collected his thoughts and said, I will make a trip to the palace. In the northern part of the capital, the sound of firecrackers rang incessantly at the entrance of a large residence with 3 entrances. In front of the large vermilion doorpost, there were 2 lions baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. At the very top, there was a glittering golden plaque with a red flower tied to it. It was the residence that the emperor had bestowed upon the Zhuangyuan. Lu Furen was not more than 30 years old, but her face looked weather-beaten. Her hair was already mottled, as if she was 50 years old. Even so, she still wore a plain green robe embroidered with lotus flowers. Her hair was combed neatly, and her face was full of smiles as she handed out money to the crowd. The 4 servant girls bestowed upon her by the emperor also stood guard at the side with smiles on their faces. Many people offered money to congratulate her. Among them, there was no lack of former neighbors. This time, Lu Min was like a carp leaping over the dragon gate. From now on, the Lu family would be able to bring honor to their ancestors. After handing out the money, Lu Furen asked the servant girl beside her, why hasn't Min come out yet? The servant girl smiled and said, Su Min is tidying up in his room. This servant will go and urge him. Finished speaking, she turned around and left. In the study room, Lu Min was looking at the painting hanging on the wall, lost in thought. The courtyard bestowed upon him by the emperor was spacious and luxurious. The study room was also more than twice as large as before. From now on, there would be enough bookshelves to store his books. However, at this time, he was somewhat absent-minded. Was all of this really what he wanted? A few days ago, he suffered a theft in the Imperial College's study room. The letters he lost were the mysterious person's letters. Those letters had all disappeared without a trace, as if they had never been there. Lu Min asked the errand boy, but the errand boy also said he didn't know. However, the other things were not lost. He couldn't help but suspect that those letters were taken away by the mysterious person. If it wasn't for the moonlight firefly painting in front of him, Lu Min would almost think that the past few days were an illusion and that the mysterious person was a character he had imagined. He carefully looked at the painting in front of him. The lines were beautiful and unrestrained. Lu Min couldn't help but wonder what kind of person it was. He was used to having another person to discuss the arguments in the book with him. Now that the person had suddenly disappeared, he felt a little lonely. Young master, madam urges you to hurry over. The new servant girl looked at the handsome and elegant young man and slightly blushed. Lu Min looked at the painting in front of him and said, let's go. 2 flowers bloomed, 1 on each side. In the 8th prince's residence in the capital, Xianli put down the letter in his hand and slightly frowned. The advisor behind him saw this and asked, Your Highness, did something happen? Xianli glanced at the letter on the table and said, Xia Hofu sent a letter saying that there was a dispute with Prime Minister Li. He couldn't hide the surprise in his heart. Xia Cheng's letter said that Li Yang had been castrated in the Jiangfu. Now that Li Dong wanted to avenge Li Yang, he wouldn't let Xia Cheng's granddaughter Jiang Su off. In the letter, Xia Qing said that Jiang Su had been framed, but he didn't say who the murderer was. Xianli briefly explained the matter to advisor Yu. The advisor frowned and thought for a while. Your Highness, I'm afraid this is the work of someone with ulterior motives. Something has happened to eldest young Master Li, and Prime Minister Li and the Jiang family have become enemies. This means that your Highness's subordinates are rebelling against each other. Their intentions are extremely sinister. Of course I know. Xianli said, Li Dong knows that I can't leave him, and I don't want to lose the Xia family. Moreover, Minister Jiang now has some power in the court. If these two sides have a dispute, it will only be harmful to me. Could it be the fifth prince's side? The advisor asked. Recently, the fifth prince's voice in the court has been growing, and His Majesty also trusts him. I know Imperial Father's temperament very well. Xianli snorted coldly. The higher Lao Wu jumps now, the worse he will fall in the future. I don't think that Lao Wu is smart enough to place people in the Jiang Fu. Then it's the fourth prince? The advisor asked. On the surface, Lao Si doesn't seem to fight for anything, but we have to guard against him. I'm afraid that it's the Crown Prince. The advisor was startled. The Crown Prince's words are immoral, and he doesn't seem to have any merit in politics. He's even more foolish and naive. Why would your Highness be worried? If it's just the Crown Prince, there's nothing to fear. Xianli narrowed his eyes. I'm afraid that this is Imperial Father's intention. A few years ago, His Majesty still wanted to change the Crown Prince. I'm afraid that he has long been disgusted. Why would he do such a thing? The advisor asked. Xianli said, I'm afraid it's just a smokescreen. Otherwise, look at how the Crown Prince has made countless enemies in the court for so many years. How can he still stand tall? If not for Imperial Father's secret instructions, I'm afraid that he would have been eaten up long ago. This. The advisor cupped his hands. This subordinate really can't understand His Majesty's intention. Xianli looked at the advisor kneeling below with disgust. His tone was still gentle. I don't blame you. Even I have been with Imperial Father for so many years, but I still can't understand what he's thinking. The advisor thought about it and said, in fact, if your Highness wants to consolidate your power, there is another way. It would be better to form a marriage alliance with the Jiang family. The Jiang family? Xianli raised his eyebrows. The advisor cupped his hands. Right now, what your Highness needs the most is the power of the Xia family and the Li family. It's too obvious to form a marriage alliance with the Xia family. If you form a marriage alliance with the Jiang family, it's tantamount to roping in the Xia family. He paused for a moment before continuing, moreover, the Jiang family's miss is still young. You can first decide on a marriage alliance. If there are any changes in the future, it won't be too late to change your mind. Xianli frowned. He recalled the rumors that had spread in the capital a few days ago that Jiang Furen had hired assassins to frame eldest Miss, but had instead framed second Mississippi. There was also the rumor that Jiang Chao had spent a lot of money at Baihua Lu but had no money to pay the bill. In the end, one of Jiang Chao's little fingers had been chopped off. Displeased, he said, the Jiang Fu is in a foul atmosphere. Moreover, the second miss of the Jiang Fu currently has a bad reputation. How can I marry her? Wouldn't I be a joke to the whole world? Your Highness, the advisor said, doesn't the Jiang Fu still have a eldest miss? This eldest miss's birth mother is someone from General Zhao's Fu. It's just a name. If your Highness marries the eldest miss of the Jiang family, not only will you have a relationship with the Jiang Fu and the Xia Fu, you may even be able to establish a connection with General Zhao's Fu. That ignorant man Zhao Guang, Xianli said, has always been on the Crown Prince's side. He won't easily surrender. As for Jiang Wan, his mind replayed the night of the Lantern Festival, and the indifferent smile of the young lady in red on the boat. His heart suddenly clenched, and he felt very concerned. Now, It seems that a marriage alliance is the best method. The advisor continued to suggest, if you are engaged to the Jiang family's miss, no matter how dissatisfied Prime Minister Li is, he will not act rashly. Your Highness has sold such a favor to the Jiang family, and the Jiang and Xia families will do their best to assist your Highness. What you said is correct. Xian Li picked up the letter on the table again. Perhaps I should seriously consider your words. In the letter, Xian Li invited Xian Li to the Xia Ho Fu for a gathering. He thought for a moment, then said, "Someone, help me reply to Master Xia Ho's words. Just say that I have accepted the Marquis's invitation, and will pay a visit 3 days later." When Master Xia Ho received the message from Xian Li's attendant, he heaved a heavy sigh of relief. Xia Furen looked at him and asked anxiously, "What happened? Did His 8th Highness agree?" He agreed. Master Xia Ho said to her, "Go and send a letter to the Jiang Fu. Tell Yan, to bring Su Su and Chao, to prepare and come over." After a pause, he added, "Tell her to bring that Jiang Ruan as well." Xia Furen nodded, naturally. To actually disfigure Su Su, this Jiang Ruan really has the ability. Master Xia Ho's eyes were full of darkness. "I have not told this matter to His 8th Highness. His 8th Highness must have thought that this matter was done by the 5th Prince, and thus has some misgivings about forming a relationship with our Xia Fu. Even so, Jiang Ruan cannot be left alive. Yan, has repeatedly miscalculated in her hands. I want to see what kind of demon or ghost this person is, to be so vicious at such a young age." Chapter 70. At noon the next day, Xia Yan brought Jiang Su Su to Ruanju. Jiang Su Su was wearing a pure white veil that covered her face from head to toe, revealing only a pair of eyes. Xia Yan said, "Wan, tomorrow we will be going to maternal grandfather's Fu. You should pack up. Your maternal grandmother has not seen you for a long time, and I'm afraid she misses you very much." Lian Xiao gave her a disdainful look. Xia Yan spoke intimately, but after all, that was Jiang Su Su's maternal grandparents, so what did it have to do with Jiang Ruan? Naturally, second sister and second brother have encountered such a big incident, it is good to go out and relax. Jiang Ruan smiled. Hearing her words, Jiang Su Su and Xia Yan's faces immediately stiffened. "Then I will not disturb Ruan, Xia Yan said gently, "I will go see your second brother. I fear that he has been framed. He is also a child with a bitter life. Mother must advise second brother well. After falling behind, second brother has suffered a series of setbacks. It is really worrying," Jiang Ruan said with concern. Xia Yan's movements paused, and she forced a smile. "Wan Yang is so concerned, your second brother will be very gratified to know." She then stood up, "Mother will not stay for long, Su, let's go." After Xia Yan and her daughter left, Baizhi looked at their backs and said, "Miss, why are you suddenly going to Xiahou Fu? I'm afraid that something has happened." Although Baizhi's thoughts were upright, she was not a stupid person. Jiang Ruan shook her head, "I just want to borrow the power of Xiahou Fu." As she spoke, Lu Zhu pushed open the door and walked in. "Miss, young Master Gu has sent someone to deliver a message to you, saying that General Guan will return to the capital next month. Eldest young master's matter can wait, perhaps there will be some progress." Jiang Ruan's eyes brightened, and she smiled slightly. "This is good news. Next month, it is not too late. If eldest young master returns, master will not treat you like this." Jiang Quan treated Jiang Ruan this way because Jiang Ruan was only a daughter, and Jiang Xing was, after all, the eldest son of his younger brother. Now that Jiang Chao had lost a little finger, Jiang Quan would pay more attention to Jiang Xing, and Jiang Xing would also protect Jiang Ruan from being bullied by others. That may not be the case. Jiang Ruan smiled coldly. "Both eldest brother and I are thorns in the eyes of the people in the Jiangfu. You must not reveal even the slightest bit of news about eldest brother to outsiders. Bai Ji and Lu Zhu looked at each other in dismay, but they saw that Jiang Yuan had already frowned slightly, and her expression was unexpectedly solemn, which had never been seen before. In her previous life, she had received news that Jiang Xing had died on the battlefield while she was in the rural residence. At that time, the Xia family's position in the imperial court was gradually rising. Now that she thought about it carefully, she realized that there were secrets everywhere. It was not impossible for Xia Yan to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots in order to secure Jiang Chao's position. Perhaps Jiang Quan was even aware of this, but firstly, he did not have any father-son relationship with Jiang Xing. Secondly, he needed to borrow the power of the Xia family, so it was very possible that he had tacitly agreed to it. Jiang Yuan clenched her fists as she thought of her warm and gentle older brother. If Jiang Xing was still alive, even if she had to use all of her strength, she would protect the life of her own flesh and blood, no matter the cost. But Xiao's residence? Her gaze turned cold. There were some people that she had not seen for a long time. Lu Zhu, stay in the Fu with Bai Ji for the next few days. Pay attention to the movements in the Fu, especially Fifth Yin. Jiang Yuan said, Lian Qiao, follow me and call Shu Xiang in. Shu Xiang, Lian Qiao frowned, Miss, this woman's intentions are not right, I am afraid that there will be some trouble. Trouble is exactly what I want. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, go, I have my own arrangements for this matter. On the second day, early in the morning, Shu Xiang and Lian Qiao were indeed waiting outside. Compared to before, Shu Xiang appeared much more cowardly. When she raised her head to look at Jiang Yuan, there was a faint trace of fear in her eyes. Jiang Yuan looked at the servant girl in front of her, who had her head bowed and knees bent. It was really difficult to associate her with the gentle and confident palace maid in her memory, who always appeared in front of her with a considerate face. She put on her outer robe and smiled, let's go. Jiang Su and Xia Yan were already waiting in the carriage. Jiang Yuan went in to take a look and found that Jiang Li and Jiang Dan were also there. Jiang Chao was sitting in the other carriage. Jiang Li looked at Jiang Su, her veiled face full of ridicule. However, due to Xia Yan's presence, she did not dare to say anything. Jiang Dan was locked in the innermost part of the carriage and looked extremely uncomfortable. When she saw Jiang Yuan come up, she hurriedly smiled at her timidly. Jiang Yuan returned her smile and sat down beside Xia Yan. Xia Yan looked at her and smiled, Yuan, this is also the first time you have been to maternal grandfather's house. The last time your maternal grandfather saw you was 5 years ago. In the blink of an eye, you have already become a young lady. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, Wan Yang also misses maternal grandfather very much. The first time she had seen Xia Houyi was when Zhao Mei had passed away. She had knelt in front of the morning hall, dressed in a white morning dress, and watched as that amiable old man had come forward to chat with Jiang Quan. Not long after, Xia Yan had become the legal wife. Later, when she had gone to the palace, she had often seen this Xia Houyi and his womenfolk at palace banquets. The shamelessness of the Xia family was still vivid in her mind. At that time, the Xia family's granddaughter, Xia Jiaojiao, had entered the palace with her and been bestowed the title of Beauty. She did not know how many times she had tripped her up, whether openly or secretly. In the end, Xia Jiaojiao had obtained the emperor's favor. Although she did not know how real the emperor's favor was, Xia Jiaojiao had used her power to bully and humiliate her many times. She only remembered that when she had finally fallen into prison, Xia Jiaojiao had been brought back to the Fu by Xia Houyi, safe and sound. As soon as Jiang Ruan's words left her mouth, Xia Yan could not help but feel a chill. This chill had come without rhyme or reason. She carefully looked at Jiang Ruan's eyes, but she really could not fathom the meaning behind her words. Only then did she smile and say, then, Wan, have you thought about what gift you want to give? Gift? Jiang Wan looked at her, puzzled. Xia Yan laughed in spite of herself. This child, don't you know that when you go to maternal grandfather's house, you have to give him a token gift? However, it is not your fault. After staying in the rural residence for so long, no one has taught you the ways of the world. Jiang Li laughed mockingly at the side. Jiang Dan was silent. Mother is right, Jiang Wan smiled. After today's lesson, when I visit in the future, I will not be a laughing stock. She paused, then continued, but today, I have not prepared a gift. I wonder what my sisters have prepared. I have prepared handkerchiefs for everyone. Jiang Su's face was covered with a veil, but her eyes were as beautiful as ever. Although it is a little crude, it was still personally sewn. It is a token of my sincerity. Jiang Li originally did not want to answer, but in her heart, she was afraid that Xia Yan would say that she had the intention to show off, so she proudly said, "Mine is a powder brought back from the palace. After applying a little, my skin is incomparably fair, and not a single scar can be seen." Her words were unintentional, but it caused Jiang Su's face to stiffen under her veil. Xia Yan also clenched her fists. Jiang Dan timidly said, I brewed a bottle of honey. Sister's gifts are all this good. Jiang Ruan's voice was slightly low, but I did not prepare anything. Silly child, Xia Yan affectionately patted her head, how could mother forget you? This morning, I knew that you might have forgotten about this matter, so I ordered the kitchen to make a new basket of pastries. Now that the weather is very cold, it can be kept for a few days. The pastries are very exquisite, and will not be lacking in etiquette. Jiang Wan was somewhat astonished, and immediately said to Xia Yan, Mother has troubled yourself. Wan Yang is ashamed to be so thoughtful for Wan Yang. You and I are mother and daughter, why would we mind such things? Xia Yan laughed, don't talk nonsense. When you see maternal grandparents, remember to personally bring the gift up. Jiang Wan nodded. Seeing her like this, Xia Yan was relieved, and Jiang Su's lips curled into a smile without batting an eyelid. Jiang Li was impatient with their conversation, and had long turned her head to the side, closing her eyes to rest. Jiang Dan looked at Xia Yan's expression thoughtfully. Xiahou Fu was very far from the Jiang Fu, and the road was slippery in the rainy weather, and the sky was gloomy. By the time they reached the gates of Xiahou Fu, it was actually only evening, but the sky was overcast, as if night had fallen. The old woman servant at the door welcomed them in, and as they walked, she said, Young Miss has returned. Master and Furin have long been waiting in the hall. Xia Yan smiled and agreed. When they reached the hall of Xiahou Fu, there was indeed a dazzling display of wealth and riches. At the head of the hall sat a man and a woman. The man was over 60 years old, and had a friendly round face. The corners of his mouth were always curled up, and he looked like a Maitreya Buddha. The woman looked to be in her early 40s. Her complexion was rosy, and her whole body seemed to be adorned with jewels and jewels. She was also very amiable. Standing to the side were two pairs of man and woman. The slightly longer man looked ordinary, and did not seem to have a proper smile. The woman beside him was as beautiful as a flower. They were the eldest young master of the Xia family, Xia Tianyi, and his wife, Shenrou. The other pair was slightly younger. The man was handsome, and his gaze was romantic. The woman beside him was not as beautiful as Shenrou. Although she could be considered delicate and pretty, she had a long face and thin lips, which gave her a slightly unkind appearance. This was the second young master of the Xia family, Xia Tian Kai, and the second young mistress, Yuya. Between these two pairs stood a young boy and girl, both of them around 13 or 14 years of age. The young girl was dainty and beautiful. She was dressed in a sky blue phoenix patterned soft satin dress, which made her look gentle and pleasant. The youth's skin was slightly dark, and he was also handsome. However, his expression was similar to that of the second young master of the Xia family. This young girl was Xia Jiao Jiao, born of the first branch of the Xia family. The youth was called Xia Jun, born of the second branch of the Xia family. At this moment, everyone in the house was standing in the hall. Xia Furen was the first to call out, Yen, Xia Yen smiled and responded, Mother. She then pushed Jiang Chao and Jiang Su Su, quickly greet maternal grandmother. Xia Furen waved her hand and said with a smile, Chao, Su, come forward and let maternal grandmother take a good look. Jiang Su Su and Jiang Chao stepped forward, and Xia Furen touched their heads. When she saw Jiang Su Su's veil and Jiang Chao's bandaged right hand, her eyes darkened. Little sister-in-law has returned. Mother has been nagging these past few days. The Xia family's eldest young mistress, Shen Ro, was the first to speak. Long time no see, Su, has become even more beautiful. As soon as she said this, Xia Yan's expression could not help but stiffen. Jiang Su Su's hands clenched tightly in her sleeves. Xia Tianyi glared at Shen Ro, but Xia Jiao Jiao's gaze was somewhat gloating. Xia Furen ignored her, but Xia Tian said, Younger sister, how many days do you intend to stay this time? I think it's just a few more days. I'm just bringing Su, and Chao, back to meet father and mother. Xia Yan smiled. Master Xia, who had been silent all this while, suddenly said, Isn't eldest miss also here? Which one is eldest miss? Xia Yan smiled and said, Wan, quickly come and greet maternal grandfather. Jiang Wan, who had been standing in the shadows, softly said, Yes. She slowly walked forward. Previously, in order to deliberately give the other daughters of the Jiang family a show of strength, everyone in the Xia family had deliberately ignored the others and only spoke to Xia Yan and the others. At this moment, a gentle reply was heard. A young girl dressed in red walked out from behind Xia Yan and slowly raised her head. Red lips and white teeth, she looked around and lingered. Although she was still young, her features were graceful and charming, without the slightest bit of timidity or childishness. It was like fine wine that had been precipitated for a long time, fragrant once the jar was opened. Xia Qing slightly narrowed his eyes. Although there was a smile on his face, there was already an invisible pressure pressing down on him. The expression of the young girl in front of him did not change. She continued to smile faintly, as if no one could shake her straight back in the slightest. Xia Cheng was astonished. Now that he was in a high position, his every move carried an oppressive aura. Although it was not to the extent of being too deep, an ordinary young girl would at least feel afraid upon seeing it. But Jiang Wan acted as if nothing had happened. Did she not understand, or was her scheming deep to the point of being terrifying? Thinking of the words in Xia Yan's letter, he had a deeper understanding of Jiang Wan. Suddenly, he smiled and said, She is indeed a eldest Mississippi compared to Jiao Jiao and our Fu, she pales in comparison. When Xia Jiao Jiao saw Jiang Ruan's appearance, a layer of melancholy and indignation arose in her heart. She had always thought that she was born beautiful, but usually, Jiang Su Su was already a head taller than her. It was not easy for Jiang Su Su to be disfigured, but this Jiang Ruan's appearance was not the least bit inferior to Jiang Su Su's. She had originally thought that a daughter raised in a village in the mountains, even if her appearance was not ordinary, would also behave in a vulgar manner. But now, it seemed that she had the bearing of a noble, making her whole person pale in comparison. Xia Tian then smiled slightly, Younger sister, it turns out that there is such a fairy-like person in your Fu. These words were somewhat frivolous. Lian Xiao frowned slightly, but Jiang Wan did not seem to hear it. There was not the slightest trace of embarrassment on her face. When this scene fell into the eyes of the Xia family, it naturally caused them to ponder over it. After talking for a while, Xia Yan ordered the servant girls to bring the gifts that had been prepared. Naturally, Jiang Su Su's handkerchief was welcomed by everyone. Jiang Dan and Jiang Li's gifts were also praised. Jiang Wan handed over the box of snacks that Xia Yan had prepared for her to Xia Furen. Xia Furen ordered the servants to keep it. Suddenly, she remembered another matter. Since you have also returned today, and last month, the Fu's ancestral hall has been renovated, you should come over to offer incense to the Xia family ancestors. A few days ago, we invited a great master over, saying that this year, the Xia family will face a great calamity. It will require those born in the 4th month to sincerely pray for one night in order to avert the danger. I heard from Yen that Ruan was born on the 7th day of the 4th month of the lunar calendar. I wonder if Ruan can help maternal grandmother with this and pray for one night in the Xia family. Lian Xiao opened her mouth to speak, wanting to stop her. Jiang Ruan could not be considered a member of the Xia family. Even if the Xia family really did face a great calamity, what did it have to do with her? Moreover, going to the ancestral hall to pray for one night in the cold weather was not a good suggestion. Even she could hear it clearly. Jiang Ruan's health had not been good when she had lived in the rural residence for many years. If she knelt for one night, even if her body did not collapse, she would still fall seriously ill. But before Lian Xiao could speak, she heard Jiang Ruan say, "If I can be of help, Wan will definitely do my best." Xia Furen smiled with satisfaction. Wan is really a sensible child. Jiang Dan looked at Jiang Ruan, then looked at Xia Yan, who was nodding, and silently lowered her head. After talking for a while, Xia Furen said that she was tired and ordered everyone to return to their rooms. Jiang Su and Xia Yan first accompanied Jiang Ruan to the ancestral hall to light a stick of incense for the ancestors of the Xia family. Then, Xia Yan and Jiang Su were about to leave, leaving Jiang Ruan alone to spend the night in the ancestral hall. Xia Yan looked at her with distress. "Wan, it must have been hard on you. If it were not for the fact that Chao, and Su's health is still not fully recovered and I have to take care of them, Mother would definitely accompany you in kneeling." "Mother, what are you saying?" Jiang Wan smiled slightly. "Mother and I are mother and daughter. Besides, kneeling here for one night is also to pray for the Xia family. Perhaps the gods in heaven will see my sincerity in kneeling and grant me a gift, so that all the wishes in my heart will come true." Her words were said innocently, but there was not a trace of a joking expression on her face, as if what she said would definitely be true. "Wan, what wishes do you have?" Xia Yan asked with a smile. "I hope that father's official career will rise steadily. The higher one climbs, the harder one falls. I hope that mother's health will be good. To live healthily, to watch everything you have managed slowly collapse, and to feel the pain for a long, long time. Eldest brother's reputation will spread far and wide. Everyone in the world will know his name, and he will become a street rat that everyone will shout and beat. Second sister will marry an ideal husband. And then die in the hands of her most beloved husband." Ancestors of Xia, Jiang Ruan put her palms together and said softly, "If you can see the sincerity of a maiden, then let the Jiang Fu and the Xia Fu be like the peonies of Luoyang, flourishing and flourishing for a long time. You will rot, you will collapse, you will change from a magnificent mansion to the dirtiest mud in the world to be trampled by others. You will scheme, you will have internal strife, and in the end, you will die at the hands of your own people. Gods in heaven, if you can see Jiang Ruan's sincerity, then let the Jiang Fu and the Xia Fu be like the peonies of Luoyang, from this moment of flourishing, with an irresistible force, slowly, slowly, slowly withering away." She spoke each word slowly, but the words that appeared to be flourishing and bright were like a black curse, covered with a layer of lifelessness. Xia Yan looked at Jiang Ruan's calm and serene profile, and a sudden fear arose in her heart. She immediately stood up, barely suppressing the panic in her heart, and said, "In that case, I will have to thank Ruan tonight. Mother still has matters to attend to, so I will leave first." After Xia Yan left the ancestral hall as if she was fleeing, Jiang Ruan slowly stood up from the ground. Kneeling? How could these dregs of the Xia family withstand her kneeling? She scanned the surroundings. Just as Xia Furen had said, the ancestral hall had just been repaired. The floor was made of the most damp and cold slate, and not even a stove had been lit. It was empty and cold. Not even a lamp had been lit, and only the faint moonlight could be seen through the window. There was even a hole in the roof, but it was unknown whether it was Xia Furen's handiwork, but the cold rain drifted in through the hole, and when it fell on one's body, it felt even colder. In such a dark and cold place, only the plaques in front of her were her companions, and the green smoke emitted by the incense burner carried a strange smell. Jiang Wan took out her handkerchief and stood at the hole in the window, where air was circulating. She wet the handkerchief and covered her mouth and nose, frowning slightly. After a moment, Lian Xiao's voice sounded from outside, "Miss, this servant has come to deliver some food." The ancestral hall's door was opened, and Lian Xiao and Xu Xiang walked in. Lian Xiao was carrying a food basket in her hand, and said, "I went to the kitchen to get some steamed buns. Since Miss has come, you have not eaten anything, and your body cannot be weak." After saying this, she looked at Xu Xiang with the faint moonlight. "What are you still standing there for? Come and help." Lian Xiao was a first-class servant girl, and Xu Xiang had come over to make up for the vacancy of a second-class servant girl. She was already a head lower than Lian Xiao, and moreover, Lian Xiao's usual behavior was shrewish. Even though Xu Xiang was watertight, she was still somewhat afraid of her. She stepped forward, knelt down, and opened the food basket. As she did this, Xu Xiang did not raise her head to look at Jiang Ruan's expression, so she did not see Jiang Ruan's gesture to Lian Xiao. Just as Xu Xiang was about to take the steamed buns out, she suddenly felt someone behind her pull her back, and her mouth and nose were covered by a handkerchief. She was about to shout, but a pungent smell rushed into her nose, and then her vision went black, and she did not know what happened. Lian Xiao had worked in the residence for a few years, and was much stronger than the ordinary servant girls. She looked at Xu Xiang, who had collapsed on the ground, and asked, "Miss, strip her outer clothes," Jiang Ruan said. Lian Xiao deftly took off Xu Xiang's clothes and handed them to Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan draped them over her body and stood up. "Are we just going to let Xu Xiang stay here?" Lian Xiao's heart softened. If the Xia family does not have any other intentions, she is only sleeping here in my place for one night. Jiang Wan said coldly, "If they have other intentions, Xu Xiang is also one of Xia Yan's people, then let them rebel." Lian Xiao thought about it, and nodded, "That's true, the Xia family is too bad, to actually let Miss kneel in this place for one night. It is obvious that they want Miss to fall sick, so vicious." She looked at Xu Xiang and said, "Xu Xiang will just take it that she has knelt in the ancestral hall for one night for Mississippi compared to what she has done to Miss, it is not too much." Fortunately, Miss has already ordered this servant to go to the medicine shop to grab some knockout powder to carry with her in case of emergency. It is really useful. Jiang Wan smiled slightly. If the Xia family only intended to let her catch a cold, Xu Xiang would naturally be safe and sound. Unfortunately, the Xia family probably did not think so. She glanced at the green smoke coming from the incense burner. "Let's go to your servant's room first." In the darkness of the night, two people dressed as servant girls walked out of the ancestral hall. One of the servant girls said in a clear voice, "Our Miss is too pitiful. Kneeling in the ancestral hall for one night, she will definitely break her body." "Xu Xiang, you think so too, right?" The other servant girl made a sound of acknowledgement. In the darkness of the night, there was a rustling sound from the forest surrounding the ancestral hall, as if someone had left. In another room of the Xia Fu, Jiang Su Su, who was wearing a veil, took a sip of tea and said to the youth in front of her, "Biao Gu, you have to think it through. My Dejijia is one of the top beauties. I just feel that such a good person is extremely suitable for Biao Gu, so I want to help you." Xia Jun looked at her. Although his expression was romantic, there was a sense of arrogance. "Put away your little tricks. Do you think that I still do not know your intentions?" A trace of anger flashed in Jiang Su Su's eyes. "Biao Gu, do you agree or not?" Among the Xia family, Jiang Su was most afraid of this Xia Jun. At such a young age, he was already infinitely romantic, and had long understood the affairs between men and women. However, he was born with a gloomy temperament. There was once when Jiang Su hid in Xia Jun's room and wanted to play with him. She did not expect to see Xia Jun molesting her personal servant girl. His methods were cruel, and the servant girl screamed repeatedly. Jiang Su hid under the bed and listened with fear. From then on, she was even more afraid of her Biao Gu. And Xia Jun did not treat her like other men, who had tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex. He always ridiculed her. Why should I listen to your orders? Xia Jun retorted. Jiang Su pinched her palms, steadied her mind, and said, if Biao Gu must miss this opportunity, then I can only regret it. Su-er knows that Biao Gu has always admired women with special talents and extraordinary personalities. Maida Jijia is 1 in 100. In a few years, I don't know which family father will betroth her to, but looking at her temperament, it will definitely be a noble family. If Biao Gu does not grasp this opportunity, it will be too late for regrets in the future. She smiled slightly. It's better to think carefully. Xia Jun's eyes darkened. He thought of the girl dressed in red in the room just now. She advanced and retreated appropriately. Her face was obviously smiling, but it seemed that there was a kind of indifference in her bones that made people want to conquer her involuntarily. He wanted to see if the skin under the red clothes was as fresh and delicious as it was on the surface. He hoarsely said, what do you want? Maida Jijia will kneel in the ancestral hall for the whole night. Why don't Biao Gu accompany her? In this way, Maida Jijia will definitely look at Biao Gu in a different light. Who knows, she might even give her heart to you. Jiang Su said. Xia Jun looked at Jiang Su and suddenly smiled. Thank you, Biao Gu, for your advice. He then stood up. Biao Gu should also rest early. We will see each other tomorrow. After Xia Jun had left, Jiang Su sat in front of the table and reached out to remove her veil. She stroked the ugly scar on her fair skin and muttered, Jiang Ruan, how about the crime of having sexual intercourse with others in a place like the ancestral hall? When I wake up tomorrow morning, I want to see how you will cover it up. Butterfly's heart jumped and said, Miss, are you not going to discuss this matter with Furen? Why don't I go and ask? Shut up. Jiang Su reprimanded, Mother always says that she will avenge me, but she has never succeeded. This time, I will do it myself. Outside the room, Xia Jun lifted his feet and walked towards the ancestral hall. The manservant beside him cautiously asked, Young master, are you really going to the ancestral hall to comfort eldest Jiang Miss? Second Miss's words are somewhat strange. I'm afraid it's not that simple. Naturally it's not that simple. The corner of Xia Jun's mouth curled up. I know exactly what Jiang Su is thinking. However, it's not bad. I will comfort eldest Jiang Mississippi. The ancestral hall's door was pushed open with a creak. It was already late at night and the rain was getting heavier. The moon was hidden behind the dark clouds and the ancestral hall was pitch black. Only the incense on the table emitted sparks and green smoke. The fragrance assailed the nostrils. It did not seem like ordinary incense. After burning for more than an hour, the room was filled with a heavy fragrance. As soon as Xia Jun walked in, he smelled the fragrance and felt his body heat up. His palms became dry and he unconsciously licked his lips. He slowly felt his way in until he tripped over someone. He was startled and squatted down to touch it. He only felt a warm, fragrant, and soft body. He gently shook it, but it did not move, as if it had lost consciousness. He thought for a moment and suddenly cracked his mouth into a smile. The heat in his body became more and more intense. Xia Jun unbuttoned 2 buttons on his shirt and then reached out to touch the body in his arms. The sound of silk ripping could be heard in the room. Chapter 71. The moment she heard this voice, Jiang Su felt as if she had been struck by lightning, and her body froze in place. Xiao Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly and looked in the direction of the voice. Jiang Su felt a little guilty from Xia Cheng's glare. When she thought of what was about to happen, she could not help but feel excited. She had not expected to meet Xianli, Xiao Xiao, and even the crown prince in the Xia Fu today. Now that these three people had come, they could witness Jiang Ruan's lascivious appearance. If Jiang Ruan's appearance was seen by an outsider, according to Jiang Quan's temperament, he could only drown Jiang Ruan. A trace of a smile flashed in Jiang Su's eyes. Jiang Ruan, you can die with this lascivious reputation. Jiang Su raised her head in astonishment. Xiao Xiao's elegant and cold profile was right in front of her, but his tone was indecipherable. Xia Cheng's heart sank. The crown prince was already extremely curious about Jiang Su's actions. He directly stepped into the ancestral hall. He opened the ancestral hall door a little, and the scene in the ancestral hall was immediately seen by the people present. When they arrived at the main hall, they saw a group of maids and older women surrounding the hall. The eldest young mistress and second young mistress of the Xia family stood to one side. On a small couch in the middle, Xia Furen's eyes were tightly shut. Her face was deathly pale, and a line of black blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Jiang Su and Xia Jiao were speechless. Xia Cheng was stunned on the spot. He suddenly looked at the snacks on the table, and then looked at Jiang Ruan. Xia Cheng knew that Jiang Ruan was definitely full of nonsense. Presumably, she had already seen through Jiang Su's plan. He stared at her gloomily and slowly said, "There are people doing improper things in the ancestral hall. I think that one of them is your maid." Jiang Su originally had many doubts about the identity of the man in embroidered robes. When she heard Xia Cheng's words, she could not help but be shocked. She did not expect that the other party was the crown prince. She raised her head and looked at the man in the middle. She saw that he looked like a young man in his 20s. He had inherited the good looks of the Tian family and was considered handsome. However, compared to Xiao Xiao and Xianli, he was lacking by more than a little bit. His eyes were faintly impetuous. In her heart, Jiang Su could not help but feel somewhat disappointed. However, when she recalled that Jiang Quan would occasionally talk to her about some of the matters of the imperial court, the disappointment in her heart faded. She stepped forward and saluted, saying, "Jiang family Sun Yang greets your Royal Highness the Crown Prince, 8th Highness, and Wang Ye. Maternal grandfather, De Jijie is my elder sister. Naturally, my heart aches for her." Jiang Su said earnestly, "If you were to tell me to leave now, my heart would also be uncertain. Besides, the princes were all benevolent people, so they naturally wouldn't care about such things. Besides, your highnesses have seen eldest sister kneeling in the ancestral hall for an entire night to pray for the Xia family. Isn't eldest sister the pride of the Xia family?" Xiao Xiao stood behind the crowd, his gaze fixed on Jiang Ruan. When Xia Cheng saw the situation, he also said, "So vicious at such a young age. Jiang Ruan, today, you have harmed my Furen. Even if you are a daughter of the Jiang family, you cannot escape responsibility. Please uphold justice for the Xia family, your highness." Jiang Su frowned. Without waiting for him to finish speaking, she stepped forward and pushed open the door. "You are such a strange person. Could it be that something has happened to De Jijie?" For Jiang Su, Butterfly had found a pure white brocade robe with golden caltrops and a brocade collar with dark patterns. She had also found a light yellow floral skirt that dragged on the floor, and a plain silk with dark patterns of water and grass flowers. Such plain and light colors made her look exceptionally elegant, except for that blemish on her face. A trace of resentment flashed through Jiang Su's eyes. Dragonfly handed the white veil to her. Jiang Su wore the white veil properly, and then slowly pushed the door open. "Let's go." The crown prince did not speak and stared at Jiang Yuan, as if he wanted to see what she would do. He saw Jiang Yuan pinching the pastry in her hand and shaking her head. If that's the case, Wan Yang really has nothing to say. What to do? It seems that we can only exchange a life for a life. After saying this, she lightly took a bite of the pastry and slowly swallowed it. The crown prince was somewhat curious and rather teased. This is the first time that I have seen such a scene in the ancestral hall. Interesting, Marquis Xia Fu is really too interesting. But it was an extremely erotic scene. Jiang Yuan sighed. Everyone has already stated the reason so clearly. What else do you want Wan Yang to say? Biaomei, what you have said is wrong, Xia Jiaojiao said. Even if that gift box was prepared by Ant for you, there is no guarantee that you would not poison it. Harming Zumuan wanting to frame Ant, this is your true face. As soon as the ancestral hall door was opened, a thought-provoking fragrance assaulted their nostrils. It contained an indescribable fragrance, and when inhaled, it made one's mouth dry and tongue dry. In addition, there was also a nauseating fishy smell. Jiang Su took a few steps forward, and suddenly cried out, "Ah!" She ran out of the door in a panic. Jiang Su raised her head in his arms, her eyes filled with tears, and her whole body trembled slightly. "Dejie." "Dejie," naturally, the physician replied without hesitation. "Unfilial son. Unfilial son." Xia Cheng pointed at the man and woman in the ancestral hall, trembling with anger. "My Xia Fu has raised you for more than 10 years, yet you still don't know how to respect yourself. Doing this kind of filthy thing with people in the ancestral hall, where has the propriety, righteousness, and honor we taught you gone to? You really have no upbringing. How is the Xia Fu going to rely on you to bring glory to the family in the future?" Jiang Su seemed to be extremely frightened and embarrassed, and she buried her head in Xian Li's arms without a care. Xian Li's brows furrowed slightly, but he stretched out his hand and gently patted her shoulder. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. "Oh, the one in the room is a loyal servant girl of mine. Last night at the third watch period, she saw that I was physically weak, so she volunteered to kneel for me for the rest of the night. Maternal grandmother said that people born in the 4th month of the lunar calendar must pray for blessings. Coincidentally, this loyal servant girl of mine was also born in the 4th month of the lunar calendar. She lied without batting an eyelid, and in the end, she asked with a slightly surprised expression, 'Why, did something happen?' Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, 'But that snack was indeed prepared by mother for me, wasn't it?' 'That's right, maternal grandfather.' Jiang Su suddenly thought of something and said, 'Since last night, Dejie has been kneeling in the ancestral hall to pray for blessings. I wonder how she is now. It would be terrible if the servant girl forgot to call her out. It is still raining, and the ancestral hall is gloomy and cold. I'm afraid that kneeling for an entire night will harm her body. It would be better to go and see her now.' When she knelt like this, Xia Cheng's heart faintly jumped, and in his heart, he only knew that it was not good. When Jiang Yuan came over, she did not know who the man inside was. Moreover, the crown prince was temperamental, and it was difficult to grasp his preferences. Perhaps, on a whim, he would really punish Xia Jun. The physician was stunned for a moment, and when he reacted, he lowered his head to smell the snack in Jiang Yuan's hand. He nodded and said, 'It is indeed arsenic.' 'That's just right. Ben Gong also wants to see what that new talented girl looks like. I heard you say that she has been kneeling in the ancestral hall for an entire night. This girl's filial piety is really rare, and Ben Gong also wants to go and take a look.' He turned to look at Xianli and Xiao Xiao, 8th younger brother. 'Xiao, you won't disagree, right?' He then laughed heartily and looked at Xia Cheng. 'Marquis Xia, please lead the way.' Her expression was one of concern, and her words were full of consideration for Jiang Yuan. She was truly like a kind and good younger sister. Xia Cheng was stunned, and then he thought of something. He hesitated for a moment before saying, 'There are guests here.' send a few servant girls to keep an eye on them. As soon as these words came out, everyone in the hall looked towards Jiang Ruan. Dejie, why do you say this? It is obviously your own servant girl who has a bad character. How can you blame others? Jiang Su said. When a servant girl's character was bad, it was inevitable that people would have some doubts about their master. The ancestral hall was not far from the garden. A manservant was standing guard by the door. When he saw Xia Cheng and the others arrive, he was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. Xia Cheng saw that the manservant was usually by Xia Jun's side. At first, he was startled, but then he understood. Yuya frowned. Is it really so? In the chilly spring weather, the servant girl who had woken up early could not help but shiver. She pushed open the window and smiled. Miss, it's almost time. Dejie. Jiang Su took 2 steps back. If that's the case, Jiang Ruan thought for a moment, and put the snack in her hand. Physician, is this snack poisonous? Everyone looked at her in shock, and a trace of light flashed across Jiang Chao's eyes. Jiang Su felt a burst of joy in her heart. Xiao saw the young girl's action of swallowing, and for some reason, he broke out in a cold sweat for her in his heart. Dejie, how could you and Biaoge? Jiang Su hid in Xian Li's embrace, still in shock, and said, this is the ancestral hall. Jiang Ruan smiled and looked at her. Greetings, Your Highness the Crown Prince. In front of so many people, Xia Cheng could no longer conceal it, and immediately shouted angrily, preposterous. Jiang Su lowered her head, and seemed to be blushing because of this preposterous remark. While she was talking to the Crown Prince, Xianli kept looking at her with a smile. That smile was like a spring breeze, but upon closer inspection, it did not reach his eyes in the slightest. You are indeed beautiful and pleasant. The Crown Prince also smiled. You want this prince to help you? At this moment, they heard a gentle voice from behind them. What is everyone looking for? Jiang Su stared blankly, and also looked at Xianli without saying a word. Her face was veiled, and only a pair of lovely and pitiful eyes could be seen. When she looked at people, it really could melt people's hearts, and even people made of iron could not help but soften their attitudes. Xian Li's lips hung a gentle and refined smile, and he looked at her with a smile. Being looked at by those gentle eyes, Jiang Su's veiled face could not help but blush slightly. When her eyes met Xiao's clear and cold eyes, her heart could not help but beat wildly. Jiang Li, on the other hand, wished for the whole world to be in chaos, and cried out, why did maternal grandmother become like this after eating Dejie's snack? Could it be that there is a problem with the snack? Dejie, you still want to quibble. Grandmother ate the snack you gave, and then fainted. There are witnesses and material evidence. Jiang Chao said angrily. Jiang Ruan turned her head to look at the Crown Prince, and suddenly smiled. In a gentle voice, she said, Your Highness, you must uphold justice for Ruan Yang. How can second younger sister say this? Jiang Ruan smiled and said, This servant girl was personally selected by mother to be given to me. How can you doubt mother's judgment? Could it be that mother deliberately found this person with improper conduct to be by my side? Jiang Ruan sighed softly. This is really strange. Why did Xia Furen, who was poisoned by arsenic, insist that it was Ruan Yang who poisoned her? Could it be that Xia Furen herself took the poison? Many thanks for your highness' concern, Jiang Su said softly. That cat has already been caught and executed. Nonsense. Xia Qing said angrily, why would my Furen take arsenic without rhyme or reason? The person on the bed stretched out an arm from the quilt. Looking at that arm, it was spotlessly white and flawless, slender and lovely. Looking up along the arm, it was an incomparably elegant and beautiful face. She turned over, revealing the other side of her face. The long scar was ugly and sinister, as if a large centipede had crawled on it. While they were talking, the man and woman on the ground had not yet woken up. They just lay on the ground, their entire bodies smooth, allowing the onlookers to size them up. Jiang Su could not help but say, De Jijie seems to have lost consciousness. Why hasn't she woken up? Didi, go find some clothes for De Jijie and help her back to the room. Jiang Wan smiled slightly. Under the angry gazes of the crowd, she slowly walked forward and stood in front of the box of pastries. Reaching out, she took out a piece and brought it in front of the doctor. Doctor, did Xia Furen really take arsenic? Xian Li's expression changed slightly, but before he could speak, he heard a faint voice say, Second Jiang Miss has not clearly seen that woman's face. How can you be so sure that it is eldest miss of the Jiang family? A young girl with black hair and red clothes, draped in morning dew, stood a few steps away from the flowering shrubs with a smile on her face. She did not open an umbrella, and the light drizzle fell on her body. At this moment, there was only indifference in that pair of charming eyes, and the smile at the corner of her lips was frightening. Xia Cheng's expression stiffened. The man in embroidered robes beside him had already opened his mouth, so it is second Jiang Mississippi. Looking at her appearance, there is an 80 to 90% chance that she has taken arsenic. The doctor stroked his beard. Fortunately, the amount is not much, so she will not lose her life. Didi accepted the order and left. Jiang Su ignored Xia Cheng's knife-like gaze and said in a low voice, I hope that your highnesses will not spread this matter. My De Jijie is, in any case, an unmarried young lady of a prestigious family. If others were to find out, her entire life would be ruined. However, at this moment, a doctor carrying a medicine box on his back hurriedly walked in. Without caring about anything else, he took Xia Furen's pulse and let out a long sigh. I will first write a prescription. Quickly go and prepare the medicine for Furen to take. Be quick. The doctor did not expect Jiang Wan to be so vigorous. However, after a short while, Jiang Wan had already finished eating a piece of pastry, and nothing had happened. On the ground, a pair of man and woman were entangled together, still maintaining a position of pleasure. Unexpectedly, they were both naked from top to bottom. The woman's long hair was disheveled, and the man was hugging her to his chest. The woman's body was covered with specks of white, muddy night and red marks. Her back was facing the crowd, and one could vaguely see the madness from last night. Maternal grandmother, what's wrong with you? Jiang Su pushed through the crowd and walked to Xia Furen's side. Immediately, 2 streams of tears overflowed from her eyes. She was extremely worried. Jiang Chao stood to one side and said in a gloomy tone, maternal grandmother is like this because she ate that box of pastries. Xia Ho Fu was twice the size of the Jiang Fu, and the garden was also very exquisite. Everywhere, it was a clear indication of the noble status of the owner. The ancestral hall was located at the end of the corridor in the garden. Its appearance was also very exquisite. If one was in the garden, one would definitely notice it at a glance. In early spring, there were still a few remnant plum blossoms blooming on the branches. Although it was gloomy and rainy, looking at it like this, there was a different kind of taste. Her words were witty and cute, and contained a certain sense of self-mockery. However, every sentence was a criticism that struck at the heart, causing Xia Cheng to be speechless. Several old women carried Xia Furen back to the room. After Xia Cheng ordered the servants to quickly prepare the medicine, he stepped forward and asked, May I ask the doctor, how is my wife's condition? Jiang Wan and Xiao Xiao stayed behind. What kind of person was Xia Cheng? He had been in the officialdom for so many years, and the origin of Xia Ho's title of nobility was also thought-provoking. Seeing Xia Jun's substitute manservant, he could almost guess what would happen next. Looking at Jiang Su's gaze, there was nothing he did not understand. It was not that it was impossible for Jiang Su to take revenge on Jiang Wan, but she could not involve his only grandson. If something really happened today, Jiang Su would be ruined, but Xia Jun had done such a thing with someone in the ancestral hall. If this got out, wouldn't it ruin his own reputation? If there were no outsiders present, he really wanted to ruthlessly slap Jiang Su twice. He had originally thought that this granddaughter of his was intelligent, and with her talent and appearance, she would be able to build a connection for the Xia family in the future. Now, it seemed that she was a short-sighted fool. Seeing this, Xia Cheng immediately stepped forward and said with deep hatred, "Furen." Before Xia Jun could think of a way to lead these people away, Jiang Su had already exclaimed, "Aren't you Biao Ji's manservant? Why are you here?" These words were clearly for Jiang Ruan's sake, but they also reminded him that Jiang Ruan was still a young girl who had not reached marriageable age. Being so lascivious at such a young age was really disgusting. "What else do you have to say?" Xia Qing said, and once again looked at the crown prince, who was watching from the sidelines. "I beg your highness to uphold justice for my Furen." "Exactly." Jiang Su's voice was as usual, but the corners of her mouth under the veil stiffened. Jiang Wan opened her mouth and shook her head, saying, "This servant girl of mine is certainly a pure and innocent young lady. Normally, she is also clean and self-disciplined. It is impossible for her to do such a dirty thing. Presumably, someone coerced her. Even if it is a servant girl, I must seek justice for her." Jiang Su looked at the dessert in astonishment, and then looked at Jiang Wan. "Isn't that a gift from Dejijie to maternal grandmother?" The crown prince looked at her with interest. "You are the eldest miss of the Jiang family?" In the morning, the mansion was shrouded in misty rain. Dark clouds hung low in the sky, as if they wanted to destroy the whole city. Only the branches, which had just turned green, looked even more verdant after being washed by the rain for a night. She walked forward step by step, and Jiang Su retreated step by step. There was only fear left in her eyes. She swallowed the question she was about to ask, and said, "Why is Dejijie here? Who is that in the room?" Jiang Wan glanced at Xiao expressionlessly, and then turned to walk forward. She heard Xiao's voice from above her head, "How do you know that he is the crown prince?" When Xia Cheng heard this, he naturally became extremely anxious, and hurriedly looked at Xianli for help. At this moment, he suddenly saw a servant girl rushing over from the opposite side. "Bad news, master, madam has fainted." "Miss Jiang," Xianli said gently. As soon as these words came out, the room became a little more quiet. After a moment, a sharp voice sounded, "It's you. You must be the one who wants to harm my grandmother. You actually dared to use arsenic on her. I beg your highness to seek justice for my Xia family." Xia Jiao bowed down and spoke righteously. Xia Cheng originally wanted to reprimand Jiang Su, but when he saw Xian Li's expression, his heart paused. He thought of the words in Xia Yan's letter, and his brows immediately relaxed. He smiled and said, Quickly greet His Highness the Crown Prince, Eighth Highness, and Wang Ye." Jiang Wan was stunned, and secretly scolded herself for being careless. She had actually been caught by this person. Suddenly, she looked straight at Xiao's elegant and handsome face, and coldly said, "The bearing of a dragon and an insect are naturally different. For example, the crown prince has the bearing of a crown prince." She suddenly smiled, and in a sincere tone, she said, "And a scum also has the brilliance of a scum." After saying this, she lifted her feet lightly, and without looking at Xiao's expression, she walked away. Jiang Su was walking towards the hall with Butterfly. When she passed by the garden, she happened to meet a group of people walking over. She only saw Xia Cheng, and called out from afar, "Maternal grandfather." The pitter-patter of rain fell throughout the night. The crown prince laughed heartily. "Ben Gong has heard that the Jiang family's second miss is an outstanding beauty. Why are you covering your face? Are you afraid that Ben Gong will eat you?" Even as shameless as he was, he could not help but feel that he had lost face when he had committed such a filthy act with another person in the ancestral hall of his own Fu, and had even been seen by one of the most respected people in the capital. Shenrou and Yuya each had their own thoughts. Jiang Wan clapped her hands, and brushed off all the debris in her hands. She then softly said, "So this arsenic is also divided according to the person. Maternal grandmother and I ate the same piece of pastry, so it should also be the same arsenic. Maternal grandmother only ate a little bit, and then she lost consciousness, while I ate the whole piece, yet I was safe and sound." Sure enough, people's lives are also divided according to their status. For someone like Wan Yang, even if it is arsenic, there is no harm in eating a few pieces. That's good. Ben Gong has always been tender and protective of the fairer sex. If I really saw second Mrs. Face being destroyed by a cat, I would also feel distressed. You. Jiang Su was at a loss for words. For a moment, she hated Jiang Wan in her heart. Xia Cheng slightly narrowed his eyes, but before he could speak, he saw Jiang Wan suddenly kneel in front of the crown prince. Although this matter seems to be Wan Yang's maidservant suffering, upon careful thought, it is actually she who has taken the blame for Wan Yang's undeserved calamity. If it had been Wan Yang last night, Wan Yang could only die to show her sincerity. This thief is really hateful. Your Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, is perceptive. Wan Yang begs your Royal Highness to thoroughly investigate this matter, and severely punish this wicked person who spoils an innocent. When Jiang Wan arrived, no one had told her who the Crown Prince was, but when she knelt, she had clearly called him your Royal Highness, the Crown Prince. This was really suspicious. Xia Cheng still wanted to decline, but the Crown Prince said with great interest, "Your eldest sister is the eldest miss of the Jiang family?" The one whose dance on the Ling Long boat astonished everyone. Xianli looked at Jiang Ruan's actions, and a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. Xiao Xiao, on the other hand, watched quietly, his eyes filled with an unreadable emotion. "I'm afraid that Biao Jijie is wrong," Jiang Ruan said indifferently. "This box of pastries was not prepared by Wan Yang, but was prepared by mother for Wan Yang." She blinked her eyes, and Jiang Chao looked at her in disbelief. Xiao Xiao's heart relaxed, and Xianli frowned. The Crown Prince laughed heartily and clapped his hands. "Interesting. Extremely interesting." That day on the Ling Long boat, when Jiang Su had helped her, she had initially thought that Xiao Xiao was on her side. However, later on, when Jiang Su went to Jining Wangfu, she had been slammed at the door several times. Thus, she was somewhat confused as to what this Jining Wang was thinking. Now that these words seemed to be speaking up for Jiang Wan, it made Jiang Su even more suspicious. Xia Cheng stiffened, and lifted his feet to walk towards the hall. Jiang Su hurriedly followed. Xianli smiled slightly and also followed. "What?" Xia Cheng was shocked, and turned to look at the ancestral hall. "Get these people out of here, and quickly call the physician." After he finished speaking, he bowed to the Crown Prince and the others. "My wife suddenly fainted. The matter of the ancestral hall can be discussed later. Your Royal Highness, please be lenient." Xia Cheng felt helpless in his heart, but this Crown Prince had always been a person who did things without restraint, and using reason to suppress him was simply impossible. He could only glare at Jiang Su and force a smile. "I have let your Royal Highness see a joke." Jiang Su was startled, and those people had already walked forward. When she clearly saw their faces, she could not help but be greatly alarmed. Among the other three, she did not recognize one of them, but the other two were Xianli and Xiao Xiao. "Wan, what are you saying?" Xia Yan looked at her, her eyes full of disappointment. "Could it be that I would poison my own mother?" "Wan, you do not know the rules of the Fu, and forgot to prepare a gift for maternal grandparents. Thus, I kindly prepared one for you. Now that you have framed me like this, what have I done wrong?" Xianli and Xiao Xiao's eyes flashed slightly, and the two of them simultaneously looked towards the manservant. When the manservant saw Xia Cheng, his heart was already trembling. His young master had not come out for a long time, but the master had already arrived. His mouth was also inarticulate, this lowly person, he kept on criticizing Xia Jun, but his words implied that Jiang Wan did not have self-respect, and that she did not have a mother to teach her, which was why she had such a bad moral character. He pushed all the blame onto Jiang Wan alone. The ways of the world were always especially harsh on women. Xia Qing raised his head to observe the expressions of those present. Xian Li would help the Xia Fu, but Xiao Xiao and the crown prince were uncertain. Jiang Wan continued to smile lightly, and did not make any excuses. Xia Qing fiercely glared at Jiang Su Su. Now, the plan was completely messed up. This granddaughter of his could not accomplish anything, but was good at spoiling things. Xian Li looked at her warmly, and then looked towards the young girl in red in the middle of the hall, whose expression did not change. Even at a time when she was being condemned by thousands of people, she still stood ramrod straight, and the corners of her mouth were slightly raised, as if she had not heard Xia Jiao's words at all. Hearing this, Jiang Su Su jumped in fright. Xia Qing smiled and said, "Your Royal Highness, Su-er's face was scratched by a cat a few days ago, leaving a scar. She is afraid of the wind, so she covers her face with a veil. Please forgive me, Your Royal Highness." She seemed to have suffered a great shock, and her shoulders trembled. When she ran out, she happened to bump into Xian Li. Xian Li reached out to support her, and Jiang Su Su fell limply on his body. In the garden, a few figures appeared. The person in the lead was dressed in flowing white clothes, and he stood tall and straight. Beside him was a slightly plump figure, with a friendly smile on his face. Beside these people, there were two other figures, one dressed in black like brocade, and the other in luxurious brocade. In the hazy mist, their appearances could not be seen clearly. Shenrou and Yuya also stood on both sides, looking at Xia Furen rather anxiously, and repeatedly calling out, "Mother." Jiang Wan slowly stepped forward, so its second younger sister. "I wonder why you have come to the ancestral hall so early in the morning." Listening to these words, it seemed that Jiang Wan was deliberately framing Xia Yan. The crown prince frowned, speaking of which, it is a pity. I don't know which family's cat was so audacious as to scratch second Jiang Miss's face. Xia Jiaojiao was originally standing beside Shenrou, and her gaze was also somewhat at a loss. At this moment, when she heard Jiang Li and Jiang Su Su's words, she seemed to have thought of something, and said, "Jiang Wan, my Xia Fu has always treated you with sincerity, how could you poison my grandmother like this?" No matter, the crown prince laughed, "Today's show is also very interesting. Let us go together with Marquis Xia to watch." Finished speaking, he walked to Xia Cheng's side. The servant girl's expression was slightly startled, but Jiang Su Su had already asked, "It's already daybreak?" She laughed softly, and that half of her ugly face suddenly revealed a strange smile. "I really can't wait to watch this good show." Chapter 72. The crown prince had a follower who disguised himself as a storyteller in Dongfeng restaurant. She had heard Xian Li mention this in her previous life. When Xia Yan came to inform her to go to Xia Ho Fu, Jiang Wan sent Lu Zhu to Dongfeng Lu and pretended to be a maidservant of the Xia Fu who had inadvertently discussed this matter. She thought that since she was going to die anyway, there was no way out. Moreover, her family's lives were still in Xia Yan's hands. Xu Xiang laughed bitterly, "This servant has no face-to-face eldest Mississippi. I beg eldest Miss to take care of this servant's parents. We will meet again in the next life." After she finished speaking, she broke free from the old maid's restraint. Before anyone had time to react, they saw her hit the pillar in the hall and immediately fell into a pool of blood. Her eyes were wide open and her body trembled a few times. She died with everlasting regret. The manservant in the courtyard quickly found stools and wooden sticks for torture. The old women of the Xia family were the ones who wanted to be merciful. However, when the crown prince said, "If I see anyone who does not follow the rules, I will immediately send someone to chop them into pieces and feed them to the dogs." These servants immediately gave up the idea in their hearts. The space between Xia Yan's eyebrows twitched when she heard Jiang Ruan's words. Now that Jiang Ruan had put it this way, she had nothing else to say. However, looking at Xia Cheng's furious gaze, she could only summon up the courage to say, "Wan Yang, one may know a person but not their heart. This Xu Xiang usually appears to be a well-behaved person. I did not expect that she would have such a vile mind." "No matter." The crown prince laughed heartily. "I have always been very benevolent. Go, I will stay here and watch you receive your punishment." However, the crown prince's greatest characteristic, and also his greatest weakness, was that he was simple-minded. Just like Jiang Ruan's previous life, the crown prince was born in the imperial family and was not favored in the eyes of tens of thousands of people. In such a position, he should have been a person with deep thoughts, but he was simple-minded, or perhaps it could be said that he was too sentimental. Xia Jiaojiao jumped in fright. Jiang Su cast a pleading look at Xianli. Xianli looked at her apologetically. Under these circumstances, he could not openly clash with the crown prince. As for the current crown prince, when she was in the palace in her previous life, she had long heard of the crown prince's many deeds. Although the crown prince did not have much insight into politics, and his thoughts were not very deep either. In the early years, the emperor wanted to appoint a crown prince, but Xiao Xiao stopped him. Everyone thought that this crown prince was not favored, but it was precisely this unfavored crown prince who stayed behind when the other princes in the palace were dealt with one by Xianli. It was unknown whether the emperor had anything to do with it. Ever since Xiao Xiao came in, Xia Jiaojiao had been intentionally or unintentionally looking at him. At this moment, when she heard Xiao Xiao's words, her pretty face immediately turned deathly pale. She bit her lower lip tightly and looked like she was about to cry. Under everyone's gaze, Xiao Xiao slowly took a step back. The expression on his handsome face did not change and was still as cold as usual. He said indifferently, "What does it have to do with me?" He was full of disdain and did not have any protective feelings for the fairer sex. Xia Cheng heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Xia Jun was smart enough to take the initiative to admit his mistake. "No, master." The doctor took a few steps back. He did not know where he had gone wrong, but the scene was different from what he had expected. He immediately broke out in a cold sweat. Jiang Wan said, "Biao Shen, early this morning, maternal grandfather and His Highness saw with their own eyes that someone in the ancestral hall was behaving improperly, but they did not expect that the person was actually Biao Gu." Jiang Wan would not take the initiative to save her, and between her and Xia Jun, Xia Yan would only choose Xia Jun. No one would speak up for her. She finally understood why Jiang Wan had allowed her to stay in Ruanju despite knowing that she had been sent there by Xia Yan. It was not that Jiang Wan was soft-hearted, but that she had been looking for an opportunity to kill her in one move without any possibility of a comeback. Now, this opportunity had come. His mind suddenly changed, and he suddenly knelt down and kowtowed to Xia Cheng, "Grandfather, it's all my fault. Last night, I drank some wine and mistakenly entered the ancestral hall. I did not expect that this servant girl would seduce me. Grandson, I really have no face to do such a thing. Grandfather, please punish me." With great difficulty, the 20 strokes of the wooden planks were finished, and Xia Jiaojiao had already fainted. The crown prince stood in the courtyard and watched lazily. The old maids were all fat and strong, and they did not show any mercy. The people present were all young ladies of noble families with delicate skin and tender flesh. When had they ever suffered such heavy punishment? Immediately, they cried out to the heavens and the earth, and screamed continuously. Jiang Su lay on the stool, and a piercing pain came from her buttocks. But what was more infuriating than this pain was the sense of humiliation. In front of Jiang Wan, in front of these noble princes and Wang Ye, she had lost all face. Like a dead pig, she was tied to the stool and tortured. She swore that if she did not avenge this enmity, she was not human. Xu Xiang, on the other hand, stared blankly. She had not expected that Xia Jun would throw himself at her face and criticize her. She looked at Jiang Ruan. This matter was very clear, it was Jiang Ruan who had schemed against her. She could only look towards Xia Yan for help, but Xia Yan turned her head away and pretended not to know. Xu Xiang's heart surged with despair, and she cried out, "Nubi did not, eldest miss, Nubi really did not seduce young Master Biao." The situation seemed to be reversed. "Your Highness does not know," Jiang Ruan smiled, "my second younger sister is the most soft-hearted. Whenever a servant commits a mistake, they like to plead with her. Moreover, I have always been cold and callous, so the servants are all afraid of me." When Xia Yan saw Jiang Su's resentful expression, her heart quivered, and she immediately understood what was going on. Jiang Su did not know that she and Xia Furan had already discussed countermeasures, and had acted on her own. Presumably, she had fallen into Jiang Ruan's trap. On one hand, she was angry at Jiang Su for not listening to her, and on the other, she quickly thought of the countermeasures in front of her. If something really happened to Xia Jun, Xia Cheng and Yuya would not spare them, mother and daughter. After all, Xia Jun was the only legitimate grandson of the Xia Fu, and in the future, he would inherit the family business. Jiang Su had just stood up with the help of Butterfly. When she heard these words, her body went limp and she almost fell down. She stared at Jiang Ruan in disbelief. Xia Cheng looked at Jiang Ruan as if he wanted to eat her up, but Xia Yan acted as if she had just heard, "What incident in the ancestral hall?" She suddenly thought of something and looked at Jiang Ruan suspiciously. Why did Jiang Ruan's complexion look so good after spending a night in the cold and gloomy environment of the ancestral hall? There was not a trace of weakness. And what was the matter with the rascals that she had mentioned? Jiang Su let out an "ah," and her entire face was drained of blood. She naturally knew that Xu Xiang's death was inextricably linked to her, and her heart was filled with fear. Xia Jun was also startled. The beauty that had been ravished last night was now drenched in blood, and it was truly terrifying. Xia Cheng clenched his teeth. Seeing that the matter had already turned out to be like this, he could only insist that it was the servant girl who had seduced Xia Jun. He angrily shouted, "Bring that unfilial son and servant girl here." Jiang Su looked gratefully at Xianli, but a trace of anger flashed across Jiang Li's face. Jiang Wan smiled slightly. Why did 8th Highness allow the doctor of Renjiao to tie him up? Then, whether this pastry was poisoned or not, and whether Wan Yang was guilty or innocent, these things are unclear. The Crown Prince sneered, "You are the servant girl of eldest Jiang Miss, how can you plead with second Miss?" Jiang Wan quietly watched everything that was happening in front of her. As early as yesterday, she had already ordered Lian Qiao to change the pastry. Naturally, she understood what Xia Yan was planning. The Crown Prince's sudden visit to Xia Hofu today was also her handiwork. Jiang Wan slightly leaned to the side, avoiding Xia Yan's deep bow, and said with a smile, "Mother must be joking." If she had accepted Xia Yan's kneel today, from tomorrow onwards, her reputation for disrespecting the D-mother would spread throughout the capital. What was the point? The relationship between Xianli and Xia Cheng was a little subtle. The princes were more sensitive to this matter. Once they received the news that Xianli had visited Xia Cheng, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince would naturally come to Xia Manor to get involved. However, he did not expect that Xiao Xiao would also return. She looked at Xia Cheng and said, "We are all one family, and if the family is harmonious, everything will prosper." Your 8th Highness's words are very well said. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that your 8th Highness was a member of the Xia family. Jiang Wan smiled faintly. Maternal grandmother's matter has come to an end, but your Highness has yet to evaluate the matter of the ancestral hall. How should the thieves and rascals in the ancestral hall be dealt with? Xianli walked to her side and said, "Eldest Jiang Miss, don't you think that they are very pitiful?" Jiang Wan watched quietly, and in her mind, the scene of her previous life in prison, watching Shu Xiang by Jiang Su Su's side appeared. Time flies, and in this life, Shu Xiang would never have the opportunity to betray her and hurt her. His gaze fell on the young girl in red standing in the middle of the crowd. She had a gentle smile on her face, but the gaze that was directed at him was full of ridicule. Xia Jun immediately understood that this eldest miss of the Jiang family had schemed against Jiang Su Su, and had schemed against him as well. Hate. Jiang Wan took a step back and smiled back at him. What does it have to do with the Jun? Xia Yan could not say a word. When Xianli heard Jiang Ruan's words, he gave her a meaningful look. The crown prince knew that the man in the ancestral hall was Xia Jun, so he did not speak and only looked at Xia Cheng as if he was watching a good show. Xianli glanced at Jiang Su Su. Jiang Su Su's face was covered with a veil, and her eyes were dense with tears. Her appearance that seemed to be unable to fall was really pitiful. Looking at the other members of the Xia family, the expressions of the few young madams were exactly the same as Xia Yan's. They were all panic-stricken, 30% restless, and 70% weak. It really made one's heart feel sorry for them. He could not tolerate the internal strife and scheming of the brothers around him, especially when they were all part of the same family but full of conspiracies. Therefore, every time he saw a case of internal strife, he would be very violent. In his previous life, Xianli had used this characteristic of the crown prince to rope in the fourth prince. The fourth prince, who appeared to be the most harmless, had always been close to the crown prince. As a result, the crown prince was ultimately framed by this close brother and ended up dying in prison. The Xia family could not help but ponder. Did this mean that he wanted to speak up for Jiang Ruan? The sudden appearance of this Jinying Wang and the crown prince today was already strange. Previously, they had saved Jiang Su Su on the Ling Long boat, so why did it seem like they were in cahoots with Jiang Ruan? A pitiful person must have a hateful side. Jiang Wan smiled and said, "Moreover, the order was given by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, so Ruan Yang was powerless." Xia Cheng wanted to vomit blood. In his heart, he was sure that Jiang Ruan already knew Xia Jun's identity. This was definitely an intentional act. He only felt that Jiang Ruan's scheming was frighteningly deep. When the crown prince saw the Xia family's actions towards her, he would certainly think of his own circumstances. The more the Xia family went overboard with her, the more ruthless His Royal Highness the Crown Prince would be. If Xianli had not been present today, presumably, the Xia family would not have just suffered a simple beating. Marquis Xia, there is no need to be angry. Perhaps it is as Miss Jiang said, this arsenic has no effect on her. The Crown Prince did not know what these words of the Crown Prince meant. It sounded like nonsense, but it caused a layer of cold sweat to appear on Xia Cheng's back. The Crown Prince waved his hand, put up the stool. This prince wants to see them receive their punishment with my own eyes. At such a young age, if she was not astonishingly quick-witted, then she had already seen through everything that could happen today. All of this is in her hands. Everything in the world was constantly changing, how could anyone be in control of everything? However, when he looked at Jiang Ruan's smiling expression, he began to doubt his own conjecture. Jiang Ruan looked at Xia Yan and said, "Speaking of which, it was mother who sent me a good servant girl. This servant girl is loyal and considerate, and I like her very much. If it were not for her last night, Wan Yang would probably have to die today to prove her sincerity. Such a loyal servant, and it was mother who sent her off. Mother also hopes that Shu Xiang's grievances will be cleared." When Xia Jun awoke, he found out from the old maid what had happened. Last night, when he had entered the ancestral hall, he had felt his body heat up, and even somewhat out of control. The taste of a night of madness was still there, but the one who had obviously been the Jiang eldest miss with whom he had fallen in love, how had she become the Jiang eldest miss's servant girl? Seeing that the situation was not good, Xia Cheng angrily said to the physician, "Quack! You dare to lie!" "What?" Xia Jiaojiao cried out involuntarily, "Your Highness, how can you be like this?" These words were really coincidental, Jiang Yuan sneered in her heart. Everything will prosper if the family is in harmony, but whose family is this harmony, and whose business is it that prospers? This had nothing to do with her in the slightest. With these words from Xianli, Xia Cheng breathed a sigh of relief and gave Xia Yan a meaningful look. Xia Yan stared blankly for a moment, then walked in front of Jiang Yuan and said, "Yuan, this matter is all Mother's fault. If Mother had been a little more cautious and not been misled by this quack's words, you would not have suffered such injustice for no reason. Mother can only get you to forgive me if I kneel down." After saying this, both her legs bent, and she was about to kneel down in front of Jiang Yuan. However, Jiang Yuan, who was standing in the middle of the hall, had a completely different expression from them. She had a smile on her face, and her eyes were cold and detached. Every step she took was incomparably sharp, as if she wanted to put people to death cruelly. Yuya supported Xia Jun into the room, and Xia Cheng followed by her side. Jiang Su and Xia Yan also hurriedly followed. The servant girls and old maids scattered, and for a moment, there was no one left in the hall. Xia Cheng wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead, and finally said in a low voice, "Nonsense, that was not some evil person, that was your cousin." Xianli was somewhat disappointed. He had originally thought that this eldest Jiang miss was an intelligent person, and that when an intelligent person reached this point, she would let it go. Did she really think that the people here would redress the injustice of an unfavored daughter of the Jiang family? It would be better to settle down for now, and save a lot of trouble. As he thought of this, he glanced in Jiang Ruan's direction and was stunned. He saw that Jiang Ruan was quietly looking at him. There was an indescribable emotion in that pair of beautiful eyes. He had seen this kind of emotion many times before. It was an unforgettable emotion. Was it hatred? "Are you questioning this prince's decision?" the Crown Prince said unhappily. The Crown Prince said, "This servant girl had a fiery temperament, and this prince still took some pity on her, but for her to die like this is really pitiful. Since the servant girl has paid with her life, young Master Xia is not entirely innocent. This prince is soft-hearted, and will not punish him on account of his young age. However, for the next 3 years, he will not be involved in official career. This prince will report everything that I have seen and heard today, word for word, to Imperial Father. Marquis Xia, do your best." When she finished speaking, her expression changed, and she no longer laughed and laughed as she flicked her sleeves and left. Xu Xiang's body trembled, and she looked at Jiang Yuan with eyes full of fear. She suddenly understood that what Jiang Yuan had said was right. With the way things were going today, she had no way out. Xia Yan was dumbstruck, and Jiang Chao and Jiang Su were also momentarily stunned. Xia Cheng was so angry that the flesh on his cheeks trembled slightly. The Crown Prince's actions were like a slap to his face. He had actually made all the womenfolk of the Xia family lie on the stools and allow others to beat them with a wooden plank, and this included the unmarried girls. Jiang Chao and Xia Yan looked at each other, and could only grit their teeth as they followed the Crown Prince into the courtyard. Even though Shenrou and the others were extremely unwilling, seeing that Xia Yan had obediently stepped forward, they did not dare to refuse. Xiao Xiao raised his eyebrows, and saw Jiang Yuan continue, "Xu Xiang, although I trust you, I trust Mother even more. Since she has already said so, there is nothing I can do." This was throwing all the spearheads at Xia Yan, and Xu Xiang suddenly felt a wave of despair. She only heard Jiang Yuan continue, "However, even if you did not seduce Biao Gu, your body was tainted, and it was in a place like the ancestral hall. If it were me, I would have long committed suicide with a piece of white silk." In order to protect your reputation, you also have no way out. Seducing or not seducing, in fact, is the same. Actually, this matter originally had nothing to do with Xiao Xiao, but in this entire room, only Xiao Xiao had said something fair. These words were like a slap to everyone's face. The crown prince suddenly laughed. Eldest Jiang Miss is right. From what I see, this matter cannot be resolved without reason. In the imperial court, there is also a price to pay for wrongly judging a case. Just now, little Miss Xia, the two young mistresses, Jiang Furen, second Miss Jiang, and second young Master Jiang have all criticized eldest Jiang Mississippi. Since Marquis Xia is advanced in age, we can forget about it, but the rest cannot be easily forgiven. Since eldest Jiang Miss Xia wants me to uphold justice for you, then I will uphold justice for you this time. Since all of you have wrongly accused eldest Jiang Miss, then each of you will receive 20 wooden planks. Jiang Su Su gritted her teeth and said, this matter is all my fault. Su Su is willing to accept the punishment. I hope that De Jie will forgive us. After saying this, she did not look at the crowd and walked towards the courtyard. Jiang Wan met Xia Yan's puzzled gaze and smiled as she explained, last night, Wan Yang was praying for the ancestors of the Xia family in the ancestral hall. In the middle of the night, her physical strength was insufficient, so the maidservant beside her took her place and knelt for the rest of the night. Who knew that a thief would come in the dark and defile the body of the maidservant beside me? Thus, Wan Yang asked His Highness for a grace to severely punish that wicked person. Xia Yan stared blankly and secretly clenched her teeth. It had not been easy for her to place an informer, but now, with just one sentence from Jiang Wan, they had all been stripped bare. But now, she had no choice but to agree. Thus, she said, Wan Yang's consideration is reasonable, it was mother's inconsideration. This was lying through one's teeth. Behind her, Lian Xiao could not hide her disdainful gaze. Xia Yan really had the face to say such a reason. Jiang Wan sighed softly. Originally, I thought that the maidservants that mother had chosen would certainly be excellent. I did not expect that Lian Xiao, Bai Ji, and even the one that I had chosen myself, Lu Zhu, would not have such a thing happen. Mother's choice, Xu Xiang, has broken this rule. She looked at Xia Yan and said, Mother, please recall the other maidservants in Wan Yang's courtyard. When Xian Li had spoken to her about this matter, it was already the last stage of the struggle. His performance was no longer as gentle and self-restrained as before. Instead, he appeared to be a little proud and arrogant. He showed extreme contempt and ridicule towards the crown prince, who was a trusted brother. However, Jiang Wan could understand the crown prince. He was nothing more than a pitiful person who, in his extreme loneliness, longed for familial love and thus gave his most important trust. It was just that, like her, they had all been let down. Jiang Wan looked at her actions. In the past, when they were in the palace, Xia Jiaojiao had always had a domineering appearance. When had she ever seen her in such a sorry state? In the end, it was just a case of a dog relying on its master's power. Xian Li paused for a moment before he also chased after her. Hearing this, Yuya took 2 steps back. No matter how she thought about it, she could not understand. Although her son's conduct was absurd, he would not be so stupid as to do such a thing in a place like the ancestral hall. There must be a hidden story. Yuya anxiously asked, what exactly is going on? What happened to Jun-er? Xia Cheng was both angry and distressed as he watched his children and grandchildren being punished in the courtyard. His heart was incomparably resentful. For so many years, everything had been smooth sailing for him. He did not expect that today, he would fall into the hands of a little girl and suffer such extraordinary shame and humiliation. As soon as these words came out, not only was Xia Yan stunned, but Shinro and Yuya were also stunned. Yuya cried out, how could it be Jun-er? Hearing this, Xia Jiaojiao stiffened. Her body could not help but tremble. She looked at Xiao Xiao with a gaze full of grief and helplessness. Unfortunately, the fallen flowers yearn for love, but the heartless stream flows mercilessly. Her tears were wasted in vain. Seeing this, Xu Xiang said in despair, "No, no, eldest miss, I did not seduce young Master Biao. Furen, save me. Second miss, save me." No matter how muddle-headed and incompetent this crown prince was, in the end, he was still a member of the royal family. How could he tolerate an official playing petty tricks in front of his eyes? Xia Jun was first dizzy from Xia Cheng's slap. Yuya had already pounced on him and hugged him, crying loudly, "My son, how could you be so foolish? How could you make such a mistake in the ancestral hall?" Shenrou hurriedly pinched her arm and said in a panic, "Children are not sensible and speak nonsense. I beg your highness to spare her this time." "Your highness." Xia Jiaojiao, on the other hand, threw herself in front of Xiao Xiao and knelt down, "Your highness, your heart is benevolent and generous. Since you have helped Biao Mei just now, I ask that your highness plead with the crown prince to help us." Xia Yan was a little dizzy from her words, but she still understood the meaning behind them. Someone had wanted to defile her, but had been blocked by Jiang Ruan's servant girl. Xia Yan secretly cursed in her heart. Why was Jiang Ruan so lucky every time? She looked at Lian Qiao, who was by Jiang Ruan's side. This time, Jiang Ruan had only brought Lian Qiao and Xu Xiang. Lian Qiao was standing at the same place, safe and sound. Could it be that that person was Xu Xiang? Her heart tightened. She heard Jiang Ruan say, "Maternal grandfather, since His Highness the Crown Prince is here, why not bring that evil person here? Why would this eldest miss of the Jiang family hate him for no reason? Just because he had put in a few good words for the Xia family?" Xian Li's heart paused, and when he looked at Jiang Ruan again, Jiang Ruan had already turned her head away. It was as if the emotions in her eyes were just Xian Li's own misperception. However, Xian Li clearly understood that it was not a misperception. The young girl opposite him indeed had an inexplicable hatred for him. Jiang Ruan looked at her with pity. "Xu Xiang, I naturally believe you. You are the servant girl that mother personally selected for me. How could I not believe in your character?" Jiang Ruan herself was also very puzzled. This Xiao Xiao had suddenly helped her. What was his purpose? Jiang Ruan walked to Xu Xiang's side, who was lying in a pool of blood, and quietly looked at the servant girl who had died with grievances. She lightly said, "Keeping your eyes open is also good. On the road to the Yellow Springs, when you turn into a malicious spirit, don't find the wrong person." "Your Highness." Xia Cheng still wanted to speak. Jiang Ruan slowly walked forward from the crowd and quietly watched Xia Yan and the others being tortured. Did it hurt? The pain that these people had inflicted on her was 100 times, 1,000 times more painful than this. No one would come to save them, and no one would intercede on their behalf. Struggling at death's door in pain, the Xia family's suffering had only just begun. When she finished speaking, she turned her head and was faced with a beautiful and heroic face. Xiao Xiao's clear and cold gaze fell on her face. The two of them were very close, and she could only hear his indifferent evaluation, "The evil air is too heavy." Xian Li's throat choked. Looking at her so close at hand, he did not know why, but there was a strange feeling in his heart. The eldest daughter of the Jiang family in front of him had never revealed the slightest trace of panic in the face of all kinds of situations today. It seemed that from the beginning until now, she had maintained an expression, a gentle and appropriate smile. Xian Li's face stiffened. Jiang Ruan continued, "However, it is a small matter for Ruan Yang to be wronged, but maternal grandmother's illness is a big matter. For no reason at all, how could she have fallen unconscious after eating a piece of Ruan Yang's snack? I'm afraid that there is something fishy about this. No matter how I think about it, I still can't figure it out. It's really strange." She stood in the middle of the hall, her posture unchanged, and said with a smile, "But today, many thanks to Wang Ye for clearing Ruan Yang's name. Otherwise, if the quack doctor were to get away with it, I'm afraid that Wan Yang would be sent to prison. The crime of murdering maternal grandmother is not a small one. Even if Wan Yang fought with her life, she would not be able to bear it. Unexpectedly, she did not give Xianli the slightest opportunity to step down. At this moment, however, Xianli opened his mouth and said, "Since it is the quack doctor's fault, then first tie him up. This kind of quack doctor will only harm people's lives in the future." As he finished speaking, he ordered the attendants beside him to tie the doctor up. The doctor did not expect that he would suddenly encounter such a calamity. He shouted, "It's clearly the old." Before he could finish speaking, his mouth was gagged and he was dragged away. However, in the end, Xianli still walked together with the Xia family. Jiang Ruan's eyes darkened. She did not know whether in this life, Xianli would still be the same as before, and finally become a good couple with Jiang Su. She was actually looking forward to that moment. Xianli finally opened his mouth and said, "Brother Xiao, there is no need to trouble godly Dr. Qiu. In my opinion, the truth of this matter has already come to light. It was merely a quack doctor who harmed people and misdiagnosed the Marquis Furan's illness. The snacks on the table were not poisoned, and eldest Jiang Miss is innocent. In the end, it was just a misunderstanding. We are all one family." Imperial Father has taught us since young that a harmonious family will prosper. Maternal grandfather, Jiang Wan, looked at him in shock. "That person defiled my maidservant's body. How could it be Biaoga?" Her words were full of shock, but she reminded everyone of the fact that Xia Jun had destroyed someone's innocence. A calm voice suddenly broke the silence. "If that's the case, Yi Feng, take my official seal and get Miracle Dr. Qiu here." Everyone's gaze converged on him. Xiao Xiao's expression did not change as he continued, "The truth of this matter will come to light." Very quickly, the servants brought the somewhat dazed Xia Jun and Xu Xiang over. At this moment, the two of them had just woken up and were somewhat confused. Xia Cheng took a few steps forward and ruthlessly slapped Xia Jun, "Unfilial son. Who ordered you to do such a despicable thing?" You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.